Group passionate about health tech and women's health innovation. We're a team of scientists, lawyers, and strategists with decades of experience solving your business needs from concept to exit, covering IP, GDPR, regulatory compliance, and commercialization. We work with startups, biotechs, pharma, and investors. We created this event to share insights and have important conversations about women's health, and primarily to build an ecosystem that supports women's health innovation, discovery, partnership, and growth. Today's and tomorrow's conversations will be focused on finding solutions to improve women's health. There will be a live Q&A at the end of this session, so please use the chat box to share your questions with us. Before kicking off this panel entitled Deep Tech Adopting Disruptive Technology, we would like to introduce our women's health leader, Fish and Richardson. Fish is one of the world's premier intellectual property and litigation firms. They work with clients to protect and enforce intellectual property rights globally, with offices in the US, Munich, and Shenzhen in China. With their deep expertise in life sciences, digital health, medical devices, clean tech, and nanotech, Fish works closely with companies focusing on women's health, maximizing the value of their IP. Fish has been recognized as the Life Sciences Practice Group of the Year in the US. They also have many programs geared towards women, advancing them in the workplace, and they've been named Best Law Firms for Women by Working Mother magazine for 3 consecutive years. If you're innovating in women's health, you can learn more about the femtech IP landscape through a short video prepared by Fish and Richardson, which you can find on our Koya website. And now we're handing over to Dr. Brittany Barreto, founder of Femtech Focus, geneticist, serial entrepreneur, investor, women's health advocate, and moderator of this panel. Can she do everything? Brittany, the world is yours and the floor is yours.
The whole world. Amazing. Thank you so much. I am very excited to be moderating this panel with some really, really incredible innovators. So as she said, I am Dr. Brittany Barreto, serial entrepreneur, geneticist, venture capitalist, and currently the co-founder and executive director of Femtech Focus. Definitely check out our podcast on Spotify and iTunes if this conversation sparks your interest today. All right, today we are talking about deep tech and adopting disruptive technologies. Sounds kind of dry. I promise it's not. It's actually super, super exciting. And so let me introduce to you our panelists today. And panelists, when I say your name, if you could just give a little wave so everyone knows who you are, that'd be awesome. So first, we have Dr. Pareya Bayam, founder and CEO of Cellen. Dr. Bayam was on the front lines of personalized medicine revolution during her doctoral work, and she was inspired to found the company Cellen after completing her postdoc. Under her decade-long leadership, Cellen has pioneered breakthroughs in decoding the genomic drivers of female reproductive function and health. She's authored over 70 research studies, and she's launched the Personalized Reproductive Medicine Initiative and created the Reproductive Atlas. As a geneticist, you are my hero. That's amazing. All DNA, all day. Next up, we have Helen Guillaume. Helen, give a little wave. There she is. She is the founder and CEO of Wild.ai. She studied mathematics and financial risks, was a quant in the hedge fund and management consultant to Fortune 500 companies in AI, artificial intelligence. And she is a rugby player, an ultra marathon runner, a triathlete, and an ice swimmer. Whoa, ice swimmer. That's awesome. Next, we have Dr. Olivia Ahn. There she is. She is the CEO and co-founder of Planera, a UK-based personalized hygiene company that has developed the world's first only certified flushable and biodegradable sanitary pad, which will significantly reduce the level of waste in the industry that it produces every single year. So we have one last amazing guest to introduce, and then we're going to get into it. We have Leah von Bader, co-founder and CEO of Ava, a digital women's health company with whose mission is to advance women's reproductive health by bringing together artificial intelligence and clinical research. Ava aims to be long-term companion for women, providing data-driven and scientifically proven insights along all stages of the reproductive life. Whew! Wow. You are all so inspiring and doing really, really big and important work. And today we're going to talk about deep tech, so sustainability, AI, precision medicine. And if no one figured this out yet, we're all focusing on women's health and wellness. And there's a reason why we need to focus on women's health and wellness. And that's because we have historically been left out of research, of medical innovation, of healthcare innovation. And so I'm really excited today for us to talk about how we're all using deep tech to improve women's health and wellness. So I'd like to kick us off by everyone kind of introducing yourself a little bit, not necessarily your background, but more your company and, what gap in women's health data are you working on in researching, and what problem are you solving? Let's start with Helen.
Thanks, Dr. Brittany. So yeah, my company is called World AI, and what we've done is, because 80% of the medical research is still done on male mice, all the products, services, devices that we're using are actually, there's not technology, it's actually men technology. What we've done is extensive research on what is a woman, and we translate that research into an app helping women train, eat, and recover based on the menstrual cycle, or based on the symptoms if they're menopause. So we have an app, and in the app you open up and you have basically recommendations: what to eat, how to train, how to recover. And our team includes the co-founder of Clue, which is well known because they invented the word femtech, and also people like Dr. Stacey Sims, who's a reference in female physiology and health. And so we have the underlying technology that feeds into our app, which is a first client of the technology. And down the line, what we want to do is be able to serve our technology to all product, services, devices that women are using that are men tech, so trackers, apps, etc. And that's us in a nutshell.
I love it. Yeah. So in summary, you're doing health and wellness on the exercise and nutrition front because it's mostly been men tech and women's metabolism has been left out, right? So that's incredible. How about Leah?
Yeah, thank you. Hi. So what Ava does is we're an around 6-year-old company, and we really started the company in the belief that physiology, so what happens in your body and what we can measure on the wrist, can really allow us to have actionable insights into women's health. So what we've done is we've developed a device. You actually see it here. You wear it only during the night, and it captures breathing rate, heart rate, temperature, and other things that we can capture over sensors, and gives you actionable insights when it comes to reproductive health. So the first product that we've launched in 2016 is a more convenient and accurate method for women to know when their fertile days are, based on the measurements that we're taking. And we're now developing this technology further in the contraception space. We've actually done recently a lot of research on the COVID side as well, because it turns out that women's physiology is very individual, and it does matter for COVID to know that too. And the other space that we're really interested in is pregnancy, but really all based on, as you said before, big data and AI collected over the wearable, and clinical research to validate.
I love it. We're definitely going to talk about wearables. That is deep tech too, right? So how about Olivia?
Hi everyone, thank you so much. I'm Olivia, and Planera is a young startup. We started 3 years ago, and we, as Dr. Brittany mentioned, a personal hygiene company that is using material technology to essentially demand better for women, for female products, because for us, the founding insight was really that disposable products have not been designed for disposal. They've been designed for sort of quick and easy use and sort of out of sight, out of mind, but it's not been made to dispose of easily. So landfills, incinerators, and waterways don't allow for any biodegradation. So that's where we developed this water dispersible technology to essentially allow women to take control back, not having to compromise between either getting a more sustainable option that may not perform as well or is more expensive, or choosing between a sort of higher performing product that is typically conventional plastic. So yes, we launched our company on the 1st of October, and we'll be doing our product launch next year.
Fantastic. The deep tech of supply chain management and materials. I love it. And then last but certainly not least, Dr. Hiraya.
Hey guys, thanks so much. Hi Leah, I love being on panels with you. This is not our first rodeo.
Again, I've been in the space for a really long time.
I know, exactly. So these kinds of panels used to be pretty lonely back in 2009 when we founded Cellmatics. So it's fun to see familiar faces. So I founded Cellmatics back in 2009. With a vision of really building a precision medicine company focused uniquely on women's health, which at the time was actually a pretty radical suggestion. Now it's the topic of panel discussion, so it's really, we've come a long way in the last 12 years. And today, Cellmatics is a biotechnology company focused on women's health through the lens of ovarian biology. And as the definition of women's health has become varied, and I think we see that diversity on today's panel, we've started to kind of narrow how we describe our work as ovarian health. So we often equate the ovary to reproduction, and we describe it as a reproductive organ, but it's actually a central endocrine organ that sits at the really at the root of every aspect of a woman's health and wellness. And when ovarian health is out of balance, or when ovarian function fails, there are significant consequences. And so Cellmatics right now is pioneering the next phase of our development, which is therapeutic interventions. We have a lead program in ovarian senescence, or ovarian aging. We hope to allow women to have control over the menopause transition, so both the symptoms they experience, but also delay the onset of menopause. And I can talk a little bit about our lead drug program. But we're also partnered with companies like Bayer AG, Evotech, and we've received funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to also develop a next generation contraceptive pill to generate the first drugs, true drugs for polycystic ovary syndrome. So happy to talk about our work on the drug side. But maybe the last comment is what has enabled us to finally really break open therapeutics in this field is our decade-long work addressing some of the data gaps and some of the gaps that traditionally existed in understanding what are the actual molecules that we would want to target with drugs. So anyway, excited to see you guys and participate today.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that. So your work in ovarian health, you know, is wildly influenced by no one knowing about the data of ovarian aging or ovarian health, right? And so, you know, you and I were sister scientists here. So can you tell us what are some other areas in healthcare that have major gaps in data for women? Probably things that we all assume, no, we know about that, but actually we don't have any data on it.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just start with cardiovascular health. So heart attack is the #1 killer of women. And yet women are enrolled in, they only make up about 1/3 of clinical trial participants for drugs related to cardiovascular health. I loved learning about Wild.ai because I use all the trackers. I've got my Oura ring here. And yet it always seems to be confused when I ovulate. And I know that Natural Cycles, another great company in the space, just launched a pilot with Oura to try to clear up the confusion. It always thinks there's something horribly wrong with me when my temperature goes up predictably every month. And so I think cardiovascular disease is a huge one where we have gaps. 80% of people with autoimmune disorders are women, and yet again, women are underrepresented in the data sets. Dementia, when we talk about Alzheimer's, we're talking about women, make up the majority of humans with dementia. So really across the board, But really the thread that unifies them all, and the reason that we're focused on ovarian health, is that clearly being female is protective for some things and is a risk factor for other things. And yet, and what biologically differentiates us and defines that femaleness is the hormones that are regulated by the ovary. And yet this is one of the most understudied organs. And to your point, we invested tens of millions of dollars over the last decade generating data sets that didn't exist before, and have finally started to decode the key role that the ovary plays, not just in reproductive health, but beyond, in cardiovascular health and those kinds of things. So.
Yeah, funding basic research is so important for women's health. And thank you for all you do and all you've already discovered for, us and all of humankind, because women's health is everyone's health, right? But let's say we produce all this data now. We need to figure out what the heck it's talking about. What does it even mean? So let's talk about artificial intelligence, AI. So Helen and Leah, I know you are using a lot of AI. So why don't you two tell us about, how AI could improve women's health and wellness?
Helen, I'm happy to start if you want to.
Go ahead.
Afterwards. Well, I mean, while I like the term AI, and I think it's a really important one, what we're really talking about is large data sets. Large data sets that we're trying to find answers in for certain topics, right? And I think, the wonderful thing about women's health that I always like to mention here is that we are using AI and big data in many areas of health nowadays, right? We use it in radiology, we use it in Lyme disease detection, we use it in all of those areas. But usually in all of those areas, you have to compare one person's data to the data set of 1,000 or 10,000 other people. And in women's health, in many areas, you can actually compare that data set to the woman herself, right? Because we have a menstrual cycle every month. So we don't necessarily have to look at other data sets. We can also look at her own data set, which makes this a really personalized data set to begin with, which I think is unique in women's health and is really fascinating for certain areas of women's health. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to collect large data sets to really make out trends and then to answer questions. And I think we've done that really well on the fertility side and on detecting fertile days earlier than other methods that have been out there. But as I mentioned before, there's other areas that are really key to that. Especially including, let's say, pregnancy, where we really don't understand a lot yet what's ever happening throughout pregnancy and what happens with the body, and we don't understand why certain things happen. And similarly to, honestly, really menopause and contraception. So I think collecting those big data sets will really help us answer some of the key questions that we still have in women's health that we don't understand yet.
100%. And Helen, what's your take on how AI can improve our health and wellness?
Yeah, I think what is incredible in female health is that there's such a diversity in life stages, profiles. So if we look at a woman taking a pill, there's like a lot of different types of contraceptives. So they're all different, trying to get pregnant, post-pregnancy, perimenopause, menopause. So all these life stages are like hugely different. And when we are menstruating, so for 40 years, when we are typically have menstrual cycle, our body changes every day. So that makes it a really, really interesting use case for as Leah was saying, like using large amount of data sets and understanding. And a lot of people and companies have been put themselves behind the fact that women are complicated, so it's okay not to be looking at it. But I mean, in the day and age where we actually have the computer capacity and the artificial intelligence and algorithm capacity to compute very complex algorithm is not okay. And that's why it's a very interesting field to be using AI, and it's a moving target. So when you think you are solving one thing for women, she may actually change. So she may change a PL or try to get pregnant at the moment. So that's why it's particularly interesting in that field. And another thing that is quite interesting as well is to be able to continuously advance research, because research in women is very limited. We are to be able to collaborate. We need the capacity of levels federated learning to be able to continue collaborating with other companies, research centers, and universities, etc., to have a protected way to share not data sets but the learnings. And that's why it's just it really cannot go not together. So
Well, I'd love to add something to that example that just came up for me. And I want to quickly talk about what we're doing on COVID, because I actually think what Pirai said is really relevant for that. when you said women's health is everyone's health and women are just very complicated, what's happening right now, just as a very good example, is there's a multiple wearable companies trying to early detect COVID symptoms, right? Based on physiology. And what happens there, and what anecdotally happens, is a lot of those women that are in those trials or are part of that complain and say, well, my whatever wearable is detecting that I have COVID symptoms every single month because my temperature goes up and therefore I have COVID every single month. And it's a really wonderful example of how, when we ignore the women's aspect to certain things, we might come to really wrong conclusions medically. And so what's important and why we're doing our research there is we want to create this baseline. How do physiological symptoms actually change for women normally? And how could COVID influence those symptoms? And we need to generate this baseline because otherwise we're going the wrong way in areas that have nothing specifically to do with women's health. And we've seen that in that example. So I really believe that all the research we're doing on women's health is in the end relevant in all other aspects of healthcare and beyond reproductive health itself.
That's right. The baseline has always been men's health, right? Whether that's how the seatbelt works, all the, the dummies in the cars are men's bodies, or whether, whatever the vital signs are or symptoms of a heart attack, right? We've always based it on men's and not women's health. But it's not just about the basic research and the vital signs of women, which I love. I'm a scientist too. But it's also about this gap in research and data around what materials work best on a woman's body. So my co-founder, she's inventing a vaginal stent, and she had to spend a year literally figuring out what medical material works best in a vagina, because that was not widely known. Some people had guessed. So let's talk about materials. Olivia, you are prioritizing sustainability in your business. Can you tell us more about the challenges of using new materials and manufacturing process for feminine hygiene products?
Of course. And I'm so pleased that you just mentioned what you said about the vaginal health and how materials affect that, because that's a huge sort of aspect of us. Because before I get to about the materials, I just wanted to raise a point that just reminded me about the standard industry protocols for even testing sanitary products, which I found was not standardized really across the board. And even, for example, the testing protocols for testing for blood, we know that the viscous properties and the organic sort of cells and stuff that you have within the blood will coagulate. That will have an effect on the materials when it touches it. However, generally you just use water. So obviously the impacts and the results that you get with any sort of polymers that you put within the materials is going to have a huge impact on your results, because the assumptions are wrong, that the testing protocol is accurate to your real life scenario. So that was our first sort of challenge, was sort of re-examining and sort of rewriting the protocols to what we felt was a more accurate representation of what would happen during a period, and then testing those protocols for new sort of materials, such as like the new adhesives and the new materials within that. Specifically, sustainability is a huge hurdle on top of the fact that we are looking at sort of more female-focused materials, because first of all, a lot of the newer materials that we're developing are typically brought across from different industries like food tech, agriculture, where even within the femtech industry, when I'm approaching machine manufacturers and suppliers, the last 3.5 years, I've spoken to one woman. Everyone else has been male. So speaking about the applications and talking about flooding, talking about the misplacement of pads is a very difficult conversation, because I either take sort of two roles. One is a sort of matronly approach, where I'm essentially teaching a group of men, like, this is what happens and this is why it's not an effective reason as to why we can't use this material or process. And the other one is sort of trying to not go down that route, but also trying to keep any sort of the purpose of that conversation to be applicable to the user. Because I think there's the current protocols and the current specifications that is almost like a checklist or a tick box doesn't address the real life user concerns. But yeah, sorry, I realized I sort of strayed apart from part of the question, but there's something around, this is something that I did not anticipate going into it, which is rather foolish of me, because I expected more women to be represented even within the femcare industry, but it wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us an example of material that somebody suggested you use and then you were like, absolutely not, that should not be in a woman's body?
Yes, so an easy example is we are looking for a biodegradable alternative for a superabsorbent polymer. And because obviously the vaginal cells are sort of similar to the inner cheek, highly absorbent, it is an extremely important route of entry for any sort of bacteria in the body. And some of the materials that are suggested for internal use or external use would harbor dangerous materials, but I think there's a lack of education about what sort of things are okay to enter into any body. But you would think that these would be standardized protocols for across the board, but because these tests are generally done on skin cells and not vaginal cells, it's very difficult to get that quantified data to say, this is the amount of inflammation you're going to expect, this is the amount of like irritation or sensitization that you could expect. And there are very few labs that do the work on vaginal skin cell and on vaginal cells for us to be able to test new products and new adhesives that come out. Because we obviously don't want our first testers to be when we send out the product.
That's right.
So being able to sort of go through and even fine testing laboratories that offer vaginal cells was very important.
Well, one thing that you said I found really interesting, I didn't even think about, was the placement of the pad, right? Or maybe the angle of the tampon or the cup or whatever, right? And so what that brings up for me is wearables. You know, I've thought a lot about wearables in terms of, you know, the types of data it collects, but I've actually never really thought about, like, are wearables even in the right place on a woman's body? Because maybe the placement was based on where it should be on a man's body. So I know, Leah, you have a wearable. That's, you know, that's what Ava's doing. So can you tell us, Leah, more if that's a thing, if that's an issue or not?
Yeah, I mean, actually, when we started, everyone around us suggested us to choose another placement for the wearable than the wrist. Everyone said, oh, why you are doing also temperature? That should totally be underarm, or why don't you do a vaginal insert? That would give you much better data. And we actually really, really resisted all of those options, just because we know from experience, and we know because my co-founder had another company before where they did cardiovascular research, and they had something on the earlobe. And he realized that even when you have a cardiovascular issue and it's a life and death issue, people are resisting to put it on their earlobe. So we said, okay, if we don't get it done on the wrist, we're not going to get it done at all, because we know people and women, people, everyone is going to resist other forms of wearables. And that's why we worked really hard to prove that we can get all the measurements also on the wrist. And by now we have really good research that shows that we can get the same accuracy of data on the wrist than other people get on the arm or vaginal insert or anywhere else. And I think that's really what we're seeing with wearables, right? Like, we're seeing the majority of wearables is wrist worn. That's what people are getting used to. There's now, I love that you have the Oura Ring on. So there is now certain evidence that some people prefer a ring. And then I think we're looking at headphones as a potential future of wearables. But really everything else, I think, has really not proven in the market to be mass market feasible, because people are just resisting the form factor.
Yeah.
Can I jump in on that?
Yes.
So we collected a large microbiome data set. We tracked 4,500 women who were trying to conceive across 18 months of trying to conceive and their pregnancy and then the outcome. And that was a big question, was what microbiome do we want to track? And where we landed was we decided to track the tongue microbiome. And I got a lot of questions about, why in the world would you track the tongue? Shouldn't you be having women swabbing their vaginas? And I said, well, a couple of things. One, I want to design a product that people will want to use. And I have swabbed my vagina for a microbiome study. It's not fun. And the other thing we know is that there are vaginal microbiomes, depending on how deep in the vagina you swab. The vagina is not a static organ. And it's very different at different spots. So the nice thing about the tongue is you can protrude it from your body, swipe it, and that's a pretty straightforward thing to do. And to your point, Leah, you have to build you have to build your data for a product that will actually be used, right? But there are these biases. So what I wanted to kind of maybe put back, Brittany, is that sometimes there's an expectation that, oh, it's for women, so shouldn't it be in your vagina? No, women don't necessarily want to be putting things in their vagina all the time to test things or to report things. Right? Like, let's build user-friendly products. So anyway, I wanted to throw that out there. And then the one extra thing I wanted to add is that we're building a drug development pipeline that's a first in women pipeline. So often a term of art in the field in therapeutics is first in man. It's actually an acronym. So in our slides, we have first in woman, and people think that that's kind of a cutesy thing. But what we're learning is that it actually means something. So what you were saying, Olivia, about how you realize how fundamental you had to go to solve the downstream problem. For us, being first in woman with a drug, building a drug for women from the beginning, not taking a drug that was built for men and repurposing it for women, what we have found is the fundamental preclinical reagents. So even something like, if you order human plasma, let me save you guys some time on your drug development if you end up flexing into drug. If you order something from a catalog called human plasma, guess what, ladies? It's male plasma. They don't put that up front. And you find that out as you start to get it in the lab and start working with it. And all of these reagents that pharma has been using for generations, they're male reagents. Anyway, so back to
No, I love that. You know, I worked in a bacterial laboratory, and we even had to worry about our auger based on what season it was in the year, because our bacteria grow different, you know? So it's like the idea that we're using reagents in the laboratory that are, you know, labeled as human, but they're men's, you know, samples is crazy. Do you actually think that we could use wearables to measure our ovarian health?
Absolutely. I absolutely think that's true. And for us, as we've imagined, how would you implement a menopause control product? So we've already thought ahead that since temperature and since these biomarkers that you guys are pioneering, how to understand what they mean in perimenopause, what they mean from month to month, we're going to absolutely be riding on the shoulders of giants when our drug is ready to deploy. Because what we're going to want is we're going to want to see those biosignals that are being read out through those wearables to really modulate the dosage of this drug over the lifetime of a woman. And by the way, we should be doing this for contraceptives too. We shouldn't have just like a one and done, hope it works, hope you don't have symptoms. We should be really titrating those very potent drugs based on those biosignals that we're getting. So I see the work that you guys are doing today, even though you have this kind of clear application in the short term, it's going to really power, those data sets are going to power all of the applications, you know, for decades to come.
Happy to power your post-market surveillance, Brian. let's
I see collaborations happening right now.
Real-time deal making. Real-time deal making. I love it.
Olivia, do you think that, you know, there are a lot of feminine hygiene products in the market, right? And so why is yours so impactful for women's health? And like, sometimes I feel like we can get so heady about like artificial intelligence and like blockchain. And sometimes it's just about like, can we make a pad that's flushable? You know, it's like rudimentary. So can you tell us about that kind of paradigm?
Sure. I think a really sort of great encapsulation of that was sort of what triggered everything with Panera. I was living with my co-founder, we were in university, and I was on my period, asked him to buy some sanitary products. And it was the first conversation I had where I had to justify why I was buying the products that I was buying. Because usually with my girlfriends, it's always like, oh, we buy this, and it's a very sort of sisterhood vibe and everyone's complaining, or, you know, there's a sort of, everyone's on the same page. And this was the first time that I was really at a loss for words when I would be asked questions like, but why are you okay putting so much money towards products like this? And that was when I really sort of took a step back and look, if we just look at sanitary pads, ignoring like the other sort of reusable stuff, sanitary pads themselves have not changed in the last 50 years. The last sort of big invention was that we put wings on them. And that was, I think, in 1966. We've had other sort of, you know, substitution of materials by adding in the top sheet, which is organic. But fundamentally, the sanitary product itself hasn't changed. And I thought that there was, you know, it was frustrating for me that I wanted to make a sustainable change in my life. But there was this hurdle of, there was a change of, I have to, you know, either buy a reusable product and therefore change my lifestyle. Why aren't there more options open to me as a woman? When first of all, you know, apart from the fact that, you know, this would greatly improve the lives of women, it's a huge market opportunity. Over half of the world uses these feminine hygiene products. And there's a huge amount of money to be made off of this. But right now, what's very frustrating to me is that what seems to be almost like a monopoly between the incumbents, where you really have no choice between this type of plastic product or that kind of plastic product. And that's really why I wanted to create something that meant that people had a choice. And one of the things that I always get asked is, why is your product better than someone else's? And I think that my product is different. We have a flushable, biodegradable sanitary pad, but that doesn't mean that you can't also use a reusable silicone cup. It doesn't mean you can't also use a tampon for when you want to do a sport. Like, there are different choices in the same way that you don't choose a skirt and wear that for the rest. There should be choices available to women. And I feel like there's some conversations that you have with investors or certain people who look at the market and say, oh, it's one product that will take it over. When if you look at a woman's period bag, it's filled with 5, 6 different kinds of products. So there's room for plenty of new innovations to come through. And I think that's what I want to see within the femcare industry, is people like the new femcare companies that are cultivating new innovations and welcoming new alternative products for people to try, rather than one product to take over, because that we still are left with that no choice aspect for the consumer.
I love that. I'm often asked what areas in femtech are already saturated. And, you know, people are like, because there's like 3 menopause apps already. And I'm like, how many brands of coffee are there in the world? You know, like, and we are women and we're different, right? So we have women in different economic statuses, different races, different religions. All of this affects everything, right? And so we need products and brands for each of these subset of groups. So Helen, actually, let's go to you. Let's talk about that, right? So like these different subsections of women, do you find that in like health and wellness, that it's, if there is data for exercise and physical well-being or nutrition, is it based on a white woman, you know, or is there diverse data there?
Yeah, so when there is research, often it's done on 30 white women in the US who are like 24-year-olds. So it really doesn't take into account the huge diversity, as I was mentioning before, of like taking different types of contraceptives, non-menstruating for different issues, in perimenopause, menopause, etc. So it's like, yeah, it's a little bit like there's men and then there's women and there's like one type of woman, but it actually cannot work. And then it also completely discriminates between your economical background, ethnicity. So like there's no diversity in that as well. That's also true in men, but in women it affects probably like more layers of things. Like our digestion is very different. The way we get, like how long we carry the babies and etc. are also different. So that's why it's fascinating to be in that world, because it's not only is untapped like the female world, but the diversity of women is also untapped. There's a huge diversity, and we have such a good response from women in perimenopause. Like, first of all, women also don't even know what is perimenopause, so they think it's like menopause. But there is this 10-year period where you are basically like you have irregular periods and you have symptoms like hot flashes, brain fogs, etc., and that can last 10 years, and that's called perimenopause. And after your 12 months birthday of not bleeding, you are in menopause, and then you're in postmenopause. But like these women, they are like, they want to understand their bodies, they have time, they have money, they are doing sports, by the way, because when we are saying women in sports, like the first reaction of people is like, oh yeah, it's a very niche market. I'm like, well, it's not because like sports for people is usually for men, but women are doing sports. And when I say like women in perimenopause, menopause, they're like, oh yeah, like that's a tiny market. But like, absolutely not. Like your wife is probably in perimenopause, and so the people have no idea, and it's a humongous market. Like everyone, like I don't know the numbers, but like I would imagine like Peloton buyers are women in menopause probably. So it's a massive market, and we completely ignore that. So that's why it's really interesting to be in there, because it's blue ocean basically.
Leah, you've been in the industry for a while now. Do you see us being more conscientious of getting data sets from different diverse women?
Yes, I think so. Also based on the honestly also based on the change of regulations and where regulations are right now. I think that's so yes, I would think so. And I think what we're seeing is we're seeing more companies in the so-called femtech space actually doing clinical research. I think that's something, looking back on my women's health career that I've had so far. We can all talk about femtech, but honestly, there's very, very few companies in the femtech world that are actually doing clinical research. So it's great if you collect data, but in the end, I'm a fond believer in clinical research and in actually getting also products in the femtech world through regulatory approvals. So if we see more companies going that path, going the medical path, going the regulatory path, we will hopefully see more diverse data sets by itself. But I would be very curious what Pirai thinks about that, because my experience in that is obviously vaster than mine.
Yeah, I think I'll just jump on that it is nice to see this become, I wouldn't say we're there yet. I don't think we can high five about it yet, Leah, but at least there's a recognition that the wellness loophole has been overused by femtech. And I think that as more companies do it, then the VCs backing those companies, often who come from the tech side of the equation rather than from the health side of the equation, will see this as a must-have rather than a nice-to-have. I think with respect to diversity, it's something that it is going to continue to be a challenge. If we look at Tuskegee, if we look at HeLa cells, if we look at the early days of OBGYN, the development of the first generation of the pill, what was done to Puerto Rican women, there is a reason why, even if we try very hard, we see this with COVID studies as well, why it is hard to build diverse data sets. We have structural issues here that we are butting up against, which is that there is a lack of trust in these communities of what is going to be done to their bodies and with their data. So I think that's something that is going to continue to be an issue. I gave a talk where I shared the effort that we were making to try to really have our data sets represent at least the demographic of the United States and make sure that at least we had representation. And in the study that I had mentioned where we had done the microbiome, we were able to actually have our data set, both from a geographical diversity standpoint, cover all 50 states, rural, urban, and also the ethnic distribution represented the US. That took effort. We had to build trust with women to be able to do that. And when I shared that in the talk that I had given, a Black woman came up to me afterwards and got emotional and she said, "Can I give you a hug?" And I said, "Sure." And she said, when I was in college, all my roommates were white, and the pill just didn't work for me the way that it worked for them. I had very different experience on the pill, and I had no one to relate to about it. And she said, "I just feel like, all these drugs that the doctor prescribes to me, like they're just not right for my body. And I really appreciate that you even mentioned it." She said, "I just don't even hear it talked about." And obviously the events of the last 12 months, I think have changed the conversation. This was, this predated that, but it's something that we've been, again, doing our best. But there's only, so much we can do until society kind of, I think, addresses some of the larger trust issues.
If this is a topic our attendees are more interested in learning about, Femtech Focus recently had a podcast episode with the founder of Earth, which is spelled birth without the B. And we talked all about Black women's health disparities in the US. And I practically cried as the host of the show. It was really intense, but it's so important for us to know about this stuff. We have about 7 minutes left. I want to talk about precision medicine. Pirai, can you actually give us the definition of what is precision medicine, and then tell us, why that's important and, how you're working on it?
Sure. So this term of personalized or precision medicine, doctors sometimes get a bit miffed when we say, "Oh, we're going to bring personalized medicine or precision medicine," because they like to believe that they're practicing personalized medicine. They're practicing precision medicine. And that they don't see every patient as a cookie cutter. So what I like to do is because we need ultimately, the clinicians are the ones who are going to deploy these products, at least, on the drug side. But what I like to say is, yes, of course you are practicing personalized medicine, precision medicine, but what you're lacking are some of the sophisticated tools that your colleagues in other fields of medicine have increasingly begun to have. So what we're talking about is many different aspects of it. So first of all, it's starting with the therapeutic hypothesis of what you're trying to treat, which is, not all ovarian cancer is the same. So in the early days when we had first decoded the human genome sequence, the first paper I remember came out in Nature and basically said ovarian cancer is at least 4 different diseases, right? And here are the 4 major categories that ovarian cancer falls into. And now, we could probably say it's 100 different diseases. And when you take something like polycystic ovary syndrome, it's literally a syndrome. Endometriosis might as well be called endometriosis syndrome. These things are highly heterogeneous. We now know that PCOS is at least 3 different diseases. So what you want is you want the entire paradigm to shift from seeing someone, as you guys were saying, first of all, to see humans as male and female plus, right? And many more categories than that. But then within female, that there are many different categories within female. And then if we zero in and say now, females with PCOS, that even within that category, there's so much diversity in how maybe 10 women who you would call a white female with PCOS, how they got that phenotype. There are many roads that can result in that. And so what we want is we want that level of precision and molecular insight going into the drugs that we're developing. But on the other end, we also want that level of precision insight to go into how we're constructing our clinical trial to match the right people with the right drugs to show that they're effective. And then finally, we want to get to a place where then the people who have the actual drugs, are getting them in a precise way. So precision is a tool that we can use throughout. And what you saw in the oncology world was when they were able to pair okay, we know this is the molecule we want to target with a drug, those drugs were failing the first clinical trials because then they went and just enrolled people with lung cancer, and they were able to see the signal. But when they were able to actually go in a precise way, diagnose the genetic abnormality using a diagnostic and just enroll those people, now that's standard of care. And so this is what we have to see happening in our field as well. And anyway, so we're excited to really be kind of pushing this forward and making this a reality. But again, this is really bread and butter in oncology. There's nothing kind of super innovative here about the model. It's really just, can we now please run that playbook to bring better solutions to, 30% of women have a reproductive condition. I get told what a niche market we are in all the time. And we have to talk about the, over 1 billion women on Earth who are perimenopausal, menopausal right now. How many billions of women are menstruating right now? 30% of all women have a diagnosable or diagnosed reproductive condition. 1 in 8 women struggle with infertility. I mean, the list just really goes on. And even within those categories, there's a lot of richness and diversity.
Well, if I ever need someone to give a seminar in precision medicine, you're the lady I'm calling, because that was a fantastic description and then examples of it. We only have a few minutes left. What I would love for us to do, because I'm about action, right? So like if people are here and they're watching and they feel even a little inspired, what can we all do collectively to change the systemic gender bias in data collection and in medicine and in, materials? What can each of us do? What's your recommendation? So let's start with Olivia. What would be your, call to action for us today?
So for me, it would be, for me as a consumer, I would ask that you demand more and expect more from your companies. That's something that was a big wake-up call. Once I started expecting more and demanding more, it's difficult to find, but then companies and corporates follow where the consumers put their money. That would be my one takeout.
I love it. Vocalizing your wants and needs as a consumer. Helen, what do you say?
Yeah, I think we need to have women, but also men thinking it's not okay, because we all come from a functioning female reproductive system and we all need to care. So I think it's like our role to make it our mission to be more aware and have everyone around us believe it. We need to change things.
Love it. And Leah?
And coming back to the quick exchange that we had before, I really think that in order to bring women's health forward, we need actual companies that are actually going to do clinical research, which is costing a lot of money, and it's not tech, and it doesn't yield results as quickly as tech. And there's a lot of hurdles why company can't go into that area right now, and that's why they do wellness, and that's why they try to do fast growth versus actually doing real research. And I think my call to action is that we will need founders and also investors who actually sign up to do research and to subscribe to that, and to treat women's health as a part of healthcare and not necessarily as a part of tech.
Mm-hmm. If
Yeah, and to add to
food-
that, like we still call like femtech, female research, etc. Is like it is much broader, and as Leah is saying, like we need a lot of investment,
Mhm.
and for some reason, like a lot of investors still think it's not for them, and they're okay to be not interested. So we need to they need to think it's not okay to not know and not invest.
Yeah. If VCs can fund Impossible Foods to make meat out of plants, they can fund our research, right? About like how our bodies work. And then close it out for us, Pareya.
Yeah, well, I'll just lean back on the statement that I made before, which is there's a lot of money to be made in solving problems for half of the humans on Earth. Women are the majority of the decision makers for healthcare. They use the majority of healthcare products. 100% of humans are made in the bodies of women. The market is just so big and so undertapped right now. And what I'll say is that I gave a talk at an AI conference where all I did was focus on data. I knew my audience was male, kind of white guy, VCs of a certain age. And just filled them full of data on, the impact of endometriosis is bigger than the GDP of Germany on an annual basis. Just threw out all these numbers. And what I was told was that the tables afterward were buzzing with these kind of young 30s white guy VCs who were saying, how did we miss this? Oh my God, this feels huge. So I think we just really have to remind people that these are huge, completely untapped markets with obvious solutions. But yeah, anyway, that's what I'll end on that.
I love it. I think our hosts, the CoPEX partners, are going to help us field questions from the audience.
Thank you so much, Brittany. That was amazing. So we have a couple of questions from our audience. First question from Alex Tristan. What is the technology that you are not developing at the moment that you think will be necessary either to implement or collaborate with in the future? So maybe Leah, can you answer that question for us? So some technology you're not working on at the moment that you think will be absolutely necessary for you to work with or use in the future?
I had to laugh a little bit when I heard that question, because I think as any founder in any kind of company in our space, we probably have like a list of like 100,000 things that we'd like to do. So I'm going to highlight the 3 most important ones right now. But really, I think the list goes on and on for us. It really does. But I think a couple of things that are important for all of us. What we're currently not doing as digital health companies, and I think especially in the femtech world, is I think we're not doing a really good job integrating into the traditional healthcare space yet. Meaning that when you look at Ava, for example, it's a product that goes to the consumer, and she's using the product on her own, and she then has to go and make sure that that is aligned with what her healthcare provider tells her. So we're not integrating really well in an existing system, and I think that's in general a flaw of digital health companies, and it's a really hard one to solve. I think the second issue that I'm seeing with multiple companies, including ours, is again that women's health isn't a standalone condition. If you have PCOS, there might be a very strong link to, let's say, diabetes. If you have, then you have diabetes during pregnancy, right? Which is again, so we're linking to other areas in healthcare, and I think we're not doing this link very well because it's already hard enough to do women's health. So we're not sharing and operate very well with other areas of healthcare yet. And then the third one, which is just, for us, I think we're a data science company. So for us, we always want to integrate more data streams than what we have right now. And it was and it's hard enough to build a wearable to collect data from there. But really, in an ideal world, we would also look at other factors that we can then use for our algorithms. And again, a lot of those factors will come from the traditional healthcare system that we would have to integrate. So we kind of come back to point one. But this is just, honestly, I could give you another 20 examples, but those are just kind of the common ones that I think are relevant for most of us.
Thank you so much. Maybe one quick question before we end this panel, directed at the three other panelists. We have so many companies like Google, enormous companies, whether they're pharma, manufacturing companies, AI companies. How come they couldn't do what you guys are doing? And do you fear that they're going to catch on and just jump in, see the opportunity and, crush all startups? Or do you think there's a genuine need for collaboration, and how are you going to integrate that in your business models in the future? So I'll let you answer very shortly. Maybe Piraye, you can start, and then I'll go to Hélène, and then you can close, Olivia. Thanks.
Yeah. So I'll use our example with Bayer, who we respect tremendously. They acquired Sharing Plow, so they basically bought the original developers of the contraceptives that we take for granted. So these guys are goes way back as far as their footprint in women's health. Little Cellmatics comes along. We signed this deal with them in 2 months. 2 months after we signed this deal with them, we licensed our first drug program to them. 2 months later, we licensed our second. We're working on more. So to me, it was just remarkable, but very validating that one of the global, probably arguably the global powerhouse in women's health preclinical research, we surfaced something non-obvious in 2 months using the power of our data set. So I think this is not a negative on those companies. What it is that the ecosystem always needs all of the players. Traditionally, startups are able to go out on a limb. They come in with different thinking. They bring diversity to the table. And I think what large pharma is very good at is commercializing, taking through huge clinical trials where you need to enroll tens of thousands of people, building huge commercial armies to go deploy those drugs. They're very, very good at that. Startups, it's not an efficient way to scale over time. But I think it's been recognized at pharma companies across the board. 10, 15 years ago, they slashed their programs on the preclinical side because small, nimble biotechs can just do a lot better. And I think this is true on digital health. I think this is true on diagnostics. When we were focused on those businesses, we worked very closely with the innovation teams at these large companies. And, ultimately, this was something they were passionate about, but not something where they could necessarily get the trust from the consumers to collect the data, get the trust from the physicians, the buy-in, move fast, make quick decisions. So I think that it's really at that powerful intersection between what startups are really good at and what large corporates are good at, that the magic happens. And I don't think that corporates are looking to come and squash the startups. I think they're looking to support them, learn from them, ultimately, hopefully acquire them and license their products. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Maybe in 2 or 3 words, Hélène, and then Olivia, because we have to jump into our next panel in a couple of minutes. Thanks.
So on that point, I think a lot of, if they do want to do what our companies are doing, like Ava or our company, is they need to put a lot of brain and time, and they're just not doing it. If you imagine in your heads a team of developers at Apple, they're all men. So if they want to look at how to develop something for the vaginal tracker or the female health, they just can't do it as well as we're doing it. So as we were saying, their collaborations are needed. We need them, and they probably need us, who've been putting a lot of time and effort. And eventually, in 5-10 years time, their technologies, which are men technologies, will not be men technologies. It will be technologies for all of us, men and women.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm so sorry, Olivia. We have to cut it short. It was a fantastic panel. Thank you very much. We hope that this discussion about the importance of innovation and technological advancements in women's health inspires all of you scientists, technologists, founders in this space. We hope to see you at our next panel on investing. And just a last shout out to our women's health leader for this panel, Fresh and Richardson. please visit our website to learn more. Thank you, everyone. Fantastic. I'm very proud of all of you. Thanks again.
Hello, everyone. If you are joining today for the first time, we are so excited to welcome all of you to What Women Want, the Renaissance of Women's Health, our annual event. We're Koya Partners, an advisory group passionate about health tech and women's health innovation. We're a team of scientists, lawyers, and strategists with decades of experience solving your business needs from concept to exit, covering intellectual property, GDPR, regulatory compliance, and commercialization. We work with startups, biotech, pharma, and investors. And we created this event to share insights and have important conversations about women's health, and really primarily to build an ecosystem that supports women's health innovation, discovery, partnership, and growth. For today and tomorrow's conversations, we're focused on finding solutions to really improve women's lives and their overall health. There will be a live Q&A at the end of the panel, so please use the chat box to share your questions with us. And before we actually kick off this panel, which is entitled Investing in Women's Health, Transformation and Change, we'd like to introduce our women's health leader, Avestria Ventures. Avestria Ventures is a women-owned and run venture firm investing in early-stage women's health and female-led science ventures. Unique within venture, Avestria's co-founder Karine Neveny and Linda Grube each bring 30 years of healthcare investment and operating expertise and extensive industry networks to the firm. When you think of the number of VCs who invest specifically in women's health, you're thinking of a very small world, and only 3% of venture capital is invested in female-founded companies. Now that has to change. As PitchBook reported in a recent report, many entrepreneurs recognize the opportunity to apply modern technology to create female-focused products. A previous lack of investor interest and minimal female-focused medical research kept the femtech industry somewhat marginalized. And although women make up 51% of the population, we make over 80% of household healthcare decisions and are the dominant healthcare users, life science research and standard medical practice remains based on the male physiology. Avestria Ventures believes early-stage women's health and female-led life science ventures are undervalued and ripe for innovation. And that's why we're really thrilled to introduce them as this year's women's health leader for this event, and as the leading VC firm that invests in women's health. And so we really are delighted to moderate this panel today. We're going to be discussing the trends and shifting attitudes to investing in women's health. We're exploring how our amazing panel of investors are taking businesses to the next level, and also discussing how to overcome hurdles and stigmas associated with female founders and women's health. And so today, I'm really excited to introduce you to our experienced and established panel of serial investors from global VCs, accelerators, and angels. So to my panelists, I'm going to give a short introduction to each of you, and when I say your name, please give a wave so everyone knows who you are. Starting with Maven Banon, co-founder and general partner of January Ventures. Maven is an engineer turned operator and entrepreneur. She believes the founders building technology companies should be as diverse as the people on this planet. She's also a mentor at Stanford X, StartX, and Techstars. Costello. Hi, Trish. Founder and CEO of Portfolio, which offers a radically different investing process designed for women. And it really brings investing into the 21st century, creating entrepreneurial funds focused where women make the markets. Matt High is the only male on the panel, co-founder of Ada Ventures, a £30 million UK seed fund that invests in underrepresented founders and underestimated markets. Matt has run VC funds and has been an active angel investor in the UK and the US. Dipali Nandia. Hi, Dipali. Could you turn on your camera, please? Perfect, thank you. Dipali is an angel investor and part of Atomico's Angel Program, focusing on digital health, femtech, and sustainability. Dipali invests only in female founders and mixed teams, and she's co-founder at Alma Angels, which is set up to democratize and demystify angel investing and create more females investing into female founders. And our last panelist, Frederic Rohr, last but not least, is head of Plug and Play in Munich and head of the health program at Plug and Play. Plug and Play is one of the most active early stage VCs with over 300 investments last year and was based out of California originally. Frederic is also director of the startup Crucifer, a healthcare innovation platform by Plug and Play in partnership with Roche, where the mission is to transform healthcare. So welcome to you all, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the introduction.
Thank you, everyone. So let's get straight into it. We're going to start with trends, the past, the present, and the future. I'll start with Maren. January Ventures has invested in various women's health startups over the last 2 years. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, your investments, but also where you see the gaps and where would you like to see more innovation?
Hi, everyone. I'm Maren Bannon from January Ventures. So I have spent most of my career working in healthcare, and I think one of the silver linings of 2020 is that digital health finally feels cool this year and exciting and is attracting a lot of interest. And I think it feels like it's finally coming into its own. And I think we all know what an outdated industry healthcare is. And, of course, it makes up a massive amount of the GDP in the US. And it feels like there are finally lots of new opportunities popping up in digital health. So a couple of the trends that I'm particularly excited about, one is virtual care and monitoring. And I think for the first time, both patients and doctors are both incentivized to adopt telemedicine. And I think it's allowed it to finally kind of break out from the shadows. And then another trend I'm excited about is the unbundling of hospitals. So I'm seeing a lot more startups kind of pop up in specific verticals where they are able to provide better care, lower cost, and overall better patient experience. So one example of this type of startup is a company we invested in based in New York City. It's called Ula Health, and it's a full stack tech-enabled OB clinic. And I think in the US, giving birth is a pretty medicalized process without great outcomes, especially compared to other developed countries. And Ula is combining technology with midwifery and community to create overall a much better experience for patients and better outcomes. And then a third area that I've been looking at a lot and I'm really excited about are the sort of underserved taboo areas of health that I think are well suited for technology. So things like menopause, mental health, sexual wellness, birth control. There are lots of other examples, but those are a few that we have invested in at January.
Thank you very much, Maren. I'll go straight to Matt. Same question. So I think you're investing for the last few years. Can you tell us a little bit more about your investment and also where you see the gaps and where you'd like to see more innovation? Oh, sorry, Matt. Can you turn on your mic? I think you're
mic on.
There you go.
Mic'd up.
Hi, Matt.
Okay, hi. Sorry, I lost you all for a few seconds there. Yeah, I think you're asking about gaps in the market that we're interested in. I think that as long as this is coming through clearly, it seems pretty bad on my end. One of the things we've become more interested in is areas that would have been kind of overlooked and passed over and potentially like stigmatized in the past. So we've invested in, women's sexual well-being and Fertility. We've invested in the vaginal microbiome in Juno Bio. We've invested in flushable sanitary pads with my good friend Dipali over there at Planera. And I think that as VCs looking to create value for our LPs, we're always really interested in those gaps where other people are not looking. And like for all the sad reasons and the ridiculous reasons that are being kind of highlighted by events like this, there are gaps everywhere you look in the women's health and investment markets. And so, yeah, that's the state of play today. We're a fund that is, like many of the other people on this panel, taking advantage of those situations by investing into those gaps. I think a gap I haven't invested into yet is probably elder women's health. I think there's a lot of reticence in that area, particularly from the kind of grossly male-dominated VC industry, quite frankly. But I think that older women's health is something we haven't invested into that I'm actively looking at the moment.
Thank you very much. Trish, you've recently launched your second Femtech fund. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and whether COVID-19 impacted your decisions at all in terms of startups you were looking at?
Yeah, yes, wonderful to be here. Let me just say a word about launching the second Femtech fund. We launched our first Femtech fund in 2018, and that was the first venture fund focused solely in women's health. And so to put that, really kind of put that in perspective, that it's such a huge and growing market, yet there had not been a venture capital fund before then focused in women's health. And in fact, only 20% of venture capitalists in the healthcare space have ever invested in a women's health company. So, the opportunities there, the gaps, as the other panelists have spoken about, are really huge. And it's going to be, a gigantic market for many years to come, because there's just such a backup of needs and opportunities. With this first fund, we were, very strong into very specific women's health issues, whether it was cancers that impact women, a lot of issues like childbirth and menopause. We're the single largest investor in menopause in the world today, between that and our active aging fund. So there's so many different areas. With Femtech 2, we've expanded a little more into other conditions and issues that impact women differently, but are not gender focused. So how women are impacted by heart disease or diabetes or pain management, addiction, those types of things that affect men and women, but affect women differently and need to be treated differently. So I agree with everything else the panelists have talked about. Menopause is huge. Remote monitoring is huge. Telehealth, we've just invested in Maven Health across 4 of our funds, our largest single investment, but the opportunities are just really broad and really, really compelling at this point. And the opportunity to have returns is there as well.
Thank you, Trish. Maybe we can get a different perspective with Frederic, who is the head of Plug and Play in Munich. So Frederic, at Plug and Play, you help startups find strategic corporate partners. All corporates looking for something different now. We've had a busy year. As Maren mentioned, it was mostly focused on health tech. Everybody was going into digital tech. What are corporates looking for now in startups? And has that been evolving with the current pandemic or the situation even in the US with different addictions, trends that we've been seeing in the US, for instance?
Thank you. Thank you for the question and a very insightful information that everyone is sharing here, learning a lot. And it's great to see how many women's health focused initiatives and companies and investments are out there. And I think it's really a good way to go. So at Plug and Play, as you maybe know, we have 2 things. One is that we invest ourselves in startups in early stages across all kind of verticals, including healthcare. And the other thing is that we do this innovation programs for our corporate partners, such as the Startup Creosphere program in Munich, where we are partnering with big corporates such as Roche Diagnostics, Sanofi Consumer Healthcare, Sana Clinics, so big clinic groups from Germany and Europe, Lonza as a biotech company, So very diverse kind of setting, and the trends, of course, are varying also with what the business units want, because we think it's really important. I always call it like a bit of the startup zoo, let's say, that we want to avoid that, and that we want a real tangible outcome for the startups and to have real running pilots. So that there needs to be really a need from the business units, from our corporate partners, and then we try to find the suitable startup on the other side that they can really co-create together. And of course, this year there was a lot of topics around COVID as well. And a lot of startups that we connected with our corporate partners that are working on solutions to diagnose or to treat or to track like a diary for during the disease, for instance. So very, very different things. And we see a lot of also shifts from the startup side, how they are kind of targeting that field as well. And so it really depends on our corporate partners, but in general, of course, in Germany also, it's still very data protection and old-fashioned in that sense. And I mean, with all the negative things that the COVID crisis, of course, has, it gave kind of the digital solutions in healthcare a little boost when it comes to telemedicine, to being able to diagnose through video conference calls and with prescriptions. And I think, I mean, it's still all horrible, but it's great to see that kind of the politicians see that there needs to be a shift, and that gave it a boost. And when it comes to women's health, of course, we also do have corporate partners and their business units that are focusing on women's health and topics like fertility or menopause. And so it goes hand in hand also with our investments, because some topics, especially in women's health, are still so stigmatized, and that there are some startups out there that really address that, or also the kind of the shyness to the topic. Let's say we invested in a company called TestCard, actually a UK-based startup that was part of our program, and they were developing something together with Roche Diagnostics, and they're also focusing on, it's like a urinal test that you get in a postcard home. So it's really also for cultures that are not so open to going to a pharmacy to buy a pregnancy test, and you can get it delivered to your home and do a discrete test and kind of take a picture, and then you get the result on your smartphone. So I think such solutions that are really kind of educational and easy to access the future. I mean, that wasn't part of the question, but I still wanted to share that. I think that that's important for all the solutions out there, especially in women's health, to open that for everyone.
Thanks, Frederic. Can I quickly ask you, Frederic, so do corporates come to you knowing what they're looking for and saying, like, these are the trends this year, I want, you know, a startup that does this or that? Or do you have, at Plug and Play, do you have a list of trends, and especially in women's health, where some of those topics are quite still taboo, do you kind of push them onto the corporates and say, well, hello, you know, there's this that hasn't been addressed yet. Maybe you should look into that. How does that work?
It's really a push and pull. So we think there needs to be kind of internally in the corporates, it needs to be coordinated, and there needs to be also the internal buy-in from the companies there, that the business units can come up with topics where they feel that they need to innovate, or where a new technology or solution can help them to support them. So there needs to be kind of the support from the corporate, but we also do support with trends, because we do have a network of over 450 corporates, and in healthcare alone, I mean, in Munich, we have 7 partners. In Silicon Valley, we have over 20 partners. So we do see a lot. And of course, companies or corporates that are often competition to each other in the normal world, let's say, are on the same side of the table, at Plug and Play, because they have facing the same challenges when it comes to innovation and digitalization. So we can really help them, and they actually also help each other. So they actually also get together with us to discuss trends and also to kind of discuss how to start a pilot project, what needs to be in place to work with the startups, from legal to procurement. Yeah, what do they need to have set before? So it's really a push and pull. We provide, of course, with our ventures team, and from our investment part, we do provide value, and we share kind of the trends that we see across the value chain from healthcare. But on the other side, we also react, and obviously it goes in both ways, and it helps each other.
Thank you, Frederic. Let's move on to Dipali. So as a angel investor on this panel, investing in women's health. What do you focus on, and how has this evolved throughout the years? Can you also tell us a little bit more on the trends you're looking into at the moment, and what you are looking for in women's health that is different from an angel perspective versus maybe an accelerator or a VC? Lots of questions.
I know, I can't even remember them now. Thank you for having me today, especially in an esteemed company, really. So I have been investing. I think my first investment was 4 years ago, and strangely, it was in a company called Live Better With, which then rolled out Live Better With Menopause. And, I think when they started, I think femtech was just about becoming a category, when the founder of Clue had really coined femtech as a phrase or a word at that point. Since then, I've looked at lots of different businesses. I've invested. I'm definitely overweight in femtech in my portfolio. 6 out of 13 companies that I've invested in are femtech, and hoping that they work out for me. But I've looked at, fertility. I have investment in Parla. I've invested with Matt in vaginal microbiome business, Juno Bio, and in Planera, which is a flushable sanitary pad. I've invested more recently in Pexi, which is personalized contraceptives, and also developing a digital biomarker for women's health. And now investing in BioCare, just committed actually. It's tackling the menopause problem using group consultations, so delivering group consultations to really lower the cost of care, especially given there are not enough menopause specialists in the UK. So, and I also invested in a sexual wellness brand called Karma. So those are some of the companies in my portfolio. In general, I'm looking at companies just, I would think, like any other VC, that is trying to solve, the big gender data gap problem that we have, and B is, providing products and services that improve quality of care, reduce cost of care, and improve customer service to an underserved customer, really. So that's what I'm looking at, and looked beyond in, digital telemedicine, personalized medicine, digital therapeutics, some infrastructure around clinical trials. In fact, looking at something now which improves diversity in clinical trials, which has always been an issue. So, some infrastructure plays, some direct-to-consumer plays. And I think your last question was, how am I different than a VC? I would probably say that I do not need to return the fund, so I probably don't have the same return criteria, and I probably also sometimes come in earlier when there's just a business plan and nothing else. So those are probably some of the differences.
Yeah, that's great. And so some of you have somewhat touched on this, but I think when we're talking about women's health, it's really clear that there are still significant challenges of building a business in this space as a founder, but also of raising capital. So either raising capital for women's health companies, or even just raising capital as a female founder or a minority group. Just throwing out some statistics. So endometriosis, which is a women's disease, only receives $1 of funding for every $200 that's invested in diabetes. So whether we're talking about endometriosis or menopause or menstruation or fertility, all spaces that have been mentioned when you're looking at the trends that you guys are all focusing on, it's clear that the women's health space has been known to be difficult to understand by certain investors, but also especially when it comes to addressing symptoms that are really quite uncomfortable for some people to bring to an investor's table, such as vaginal dryness, lack of sex drive, menstrual diarrhea, chronic pain. And these are very real issues for women. So I'm going to switch gears a bit. And Matt, as the male on the panel, I'm going to start with you, actually. There are a lot of horror stories that we've heard from female founders when pitching to male investors. Can you share what your experience has been with investing in women's health, and also how you might differ from maybe the typical male investor who would squirm at the notion of some of those topics that I just mentioned? Matt, are you there? Okay, whilst we wait for Matt's mic to start working, Maren, I'm going to throw that. Oh, here you go, Matt.
questions we asked is that I think it's changed. So even 3 years ago, didn't have, even like 3 years ago, we didn't have like the community of angels. We didn't have Dipali, Sophia, many others. We certainly didn't have January Ventures and Ada Ventures, funds that were actively marketing themselves to founders that were not getting funded, women included. And so the market that you're discussing, the kind of the male investor, not wanting to look at, female vaginal dryness as a technology solution they could invest in, I just believe, and maybe I'm an optimist, has radically changed in the last kind of 12, 24, and 36 months. So I think it is pause and cause for optimism actually in the issues that you're talking about. I will share that in raising our fund, we were met with some of the same issues and biases that you're talking about, and some people were very and sensitive about our strategy, to be honest with you. So yeah, I think that's a society in our eyes, and so I don't think it's as much as it's terrible for this. I'm not sure how well this is coming through. Yeah, is it? Am I? Yeah, okay, you can hear. So I think that looking at it from a different angle, I think that the women that have pitched us over the last 2 years bring an incredible sense of mission to the table. And you hear a lot of VCs talking about, I'm looking for mission-driven founders. And there are, you can choose any kind of underrepresented, we're talking about underrepresented in venture capital terms here, group, and you're going to find that mission, that power, that drive to prove people wrong. That ultimately creates, in my experience, an awful lot of the value that gets created in a venture-backed scenario. So I think whilst society is changing, venture capital, angel investing, early stage startup investing and funding is quickly recognizing that there was an arbitrage opportunity that's shrinking rapidly and is potentially almost gone now. So I guess my reflection is it's a rapidly changing funding environment, and for one, I think it's now kind of time to hopefully celebrate and see those data, that data you're referring to, which is just outrageous. If what I'm saying is true, that data will change and improve dramatically next year, the year after.
Okay, great. And Maren and Trish, I'd actually like to ask you the same question. Both of you have created VC funds that are focusing on women, female founders and women's health specifically. So you must have created that for a reason. Was helping women overcome some of these hurdles part of the reason as to why you created these funds? And what do you think can be done to change these statistics and these facts? I'll start off with you, Maren.
Yeah, so I appreciate Matt's optimism, and I think that there's a lot more attention around funding female founders and diversity. Unfortunately, I think a lot of it is talk still, and I don't think that the numbers are shifting nearly as fast as they need to. So I definitely agree with Matt in terms of like the thesis in the long run. But I think it needs to move faster because the numbers are still just so low and so just shockingly low. And my experience, I was a female founder and went through that experience of pitching investors. And I remember sitting there pitching this very well-known male investor in Silicon Valley. And he said, I would love to invest in you, but I'm not excited about your business, which was kids' activities. So he said, not an area I'm interested in. If you were to do hedge funds or golf, like sign me up. And so I think that's sort of an example of just like the thought process out there. And I think there needs to be a huge shift. And then what was the second part of the question?
So beyond creating the fund that you built, how can we create systemic change to make that shift happen? So what can be done to change the mindsets of some of these investors and just the general attitude towards women's health in general?
Yeah, so I wrote a post recently in Forbes on how we need to get rid of the term femtech. And I think that the problem with the term femtech is it almost makes it sound like this niche that you can ignore, that's sort of like a woman's problem that is easy to just sort of like put in a little box and not pay attention to. And I actually think women's health affects, directly affects half the population, and of course affects the whole population indirectly. And I think it needs to become much more mainstream and just talked about as part of just the general digital health conversation. So that's one piece of it. And then I think the other piece of it, in order to make real change, I think it's really about more diverse and more female check writing partners at VC funds. And I think it needs to be the people that are actually making the decisions. And so I think funds like Ada Ventures and Portfolia and angel investors like Topali, and I think these initiatives all go such a long way, but we just need more of it. And I think that's the biggest thing that's going to make a difference. I think all the talk about, the media attention on it is great. I think removing bias from investor processes. I think widening the top of funnel and the pipelines, they're all important things that need to be done. But I think the biggest way to move the needle is just about more people actually writing checks into these founders. And that's why I co-founded January.
Great, yeah. And Trish, so a similar line of questioning. I say you're an expert in pushing boundaries and raising awareness in women's health. In terms of diversity, do you also think there needs to be specific funds focused on minority groups per se? And how would you attract more innovation and funding in underrepresented populations? So beyond increasing the number of investors interested in this issue, is there PR? What do you suggest can be done? That's to Trish.
Right. Well, so much of this is that it helps to have a specialty focus in the women's health space. On the early stage, we can get in, to a number of different kinds of companies, but as you grow them, it really helps to have the networks and the specific knowledge and expertise. So it's very positive to me that we have more and more groups that are getting in with the focus. What I don't want to see is that women's health was the flavor of the month. And a lot of healthcare VCs will do one women's health deal, and then they think they've checked the box. And that's what we've seen actually with women overall, women founders is, okay, now I'm in one woman founder, I've done my work. That's not what we need. We need a lot of money, smart money going into women's health, going into women founders. And to take that diversity question a little farther here, we need to be backing people of color. One of the highest death rates, in the U.S. is women of color giving birth who have no other, health issues. So they're 10 times as likely to have a bad outcome and 3 times as likely to die than their white counterparts. So, and this isn't childbirth right here I'm speaking about, but it's all across women's health and all across health, in general. And so we need to be looking at the opportunities across all those areas, and we need to have more women partners and more women limited partner investors coming into funds. We have the problem of the N of one, where too often when you're pitching to male VCs, even healthcare experts, they will come back to, well, I don't think my wife has that problem. And so there's this really inappropriate, a focus on whether or not they believe their wife has that problem and connecting that to the opportunity. One of my portfolio companies jokes that Silicon Valley has the answer to bladder control because no venture capitalist wife has ever had a bladder control issue, which of course we know isn't true.
Thank you so much, Trish. I'm actually going to stay with you for a moment. I think you work with a global network of top VCs, so I'd like you to explain that to us. But I'll just mention something to our audience right now, which they might not know, is the performance of your first 2 funds places you in the top quartile of venture funds launched in 2016 and 2017. How are you perceived by you mentioned Silicon Valley, how are you perceived by other investors? Are they seeing you as a leader investor, or are they still seeing you as a niche firm in a niche market?
Mm-hmm. So in the early days, I think we were definitely seen as a niche fund. And the other piece of that makes it interesting is that we maximize the limited partner members, investors in our funds. So every one of my funds has 249 limited partner investor members, and nearly all of them are women. And about 40% of them come out of the healthcare field. So they're OB-GYNs themselves, or anesthesiologists, or consultants. And so, because a lot of things that involve women are kind of downplayed, I think many people thought of us as, oh, that group of women investing. But the numbers speak for themselves. And so I think we're now getting the kind of respect that we're due, because we just do great deals, and we're already delivering major returns to our investors. So that gets their attention. But I think we need to keep bringing in women at all of those levels. When we're backing companies that are going to change women's lives, and the LP investors are also women, then we kind of close that whole circle. We're backing those companies, we're bringing value to those companies, and then we're the ones that win, when they exit. And so it's important for women to put their money, and men to put their money behind what they believe in.
Thank you, Trish. Dipali, can you tell us more about the angel networks you're involved in? I know you're very, very involved in the angel world. And how do you promote women's health in those networks, through those networks? And have you seen any change in the perception that investors have towards women's health?
I'm involved currently with Alma Angels. I co-founded it at the end of last year, really, because I never met enough female angel investors when I was advising businesses. And it has grown to about 180 people over COVID. And we are just doing a data exercise to see how many people have invested over the year. But essentially, it was formed to create female angel investors to invest in female-founded businesses. So as a result of that, we tend to see a lot of businesses that are run by female founders, and therefore a lot of women's health as well. I was recently invited to invest in a women's health fertility business by a fund, but it was started by a male founder, and I politely declined. I did think about it for a while, but I did not do it. And that's something I need to think about, because at the end of the day, it's still women's health. So not sure whether I should have done it or not, but we see a lot of women's health. People are very excited about the category, but I will say that we need to see returns at the end of the day for it to be very, very exciting, because in many cases it's still early days. At least in the UK ecosystem, it's early days, right? So I think when we see more returns, it'll be even more exciting. I'm also a part of the Atomico Angel program. This year I invested on their behalf, and I invested in I guess 8 or 9 female founders, and 6 of them for women's health businesses. So that's where I stand on women's health. Was there any other questions? Sorry, I can't remember the last one, if there was any.
No, I think you've answered them all. Thank you very much, Dipali. I'd like to move on to Frédéric on the same theme. How can you ensure that corporates invest in women's health when you're plug and play? How do you make sure that they're interested in women's health, and that the attitudes vis-a-vis investing in women's health change?
So maybe in general, I just have a couple, because I'm listening to you guys, and I am having a couple of questions. Yeah, I mean, I'm not the moderator here, but just for an interaction, because for me, Trish, that you mentioned that sitting in front of a VC in Silicon Valley, that someone that it's like, oh, my wife doesn't have that problem. I mean, we don't need to go back to the whole stigma and where it comes from, but isn't the entire, I mean, it's great that we do this conference and that we're part of this, and it shows that there is like a lack of transparency, communication, information about the issues. But is that like kind of where like the awareness factor is already lacking the problem? Because that goes also a bit to the question, at least, because if no one is informed about the issues that we are having as a woman with their health, then how would someone think that it might be interesting? And is it because the topics used to be taboo, because they're not not elegant to talk about, or not what you want a woman to perceive? And that's what the VC fund from Silicon Valley doesn't want to hear about period pain or period diarrhea, like, to just give an example.
So maybe Maren, you'd like to answer that question?
Sorry?
Yeah, what was the question?
No, I just wanted to ask, because Trish gave the example of a VC from Silicon Valley as a male VC fund that used it, and like, oh, my wife doesn't have that kind of a problem.
Right.
So, like, what do you, I mean, because in the end, maybe I'm too naive, but I mean, yes, of course, we don't have enough female founders, agreed. And that's something that we need to push and support, fully agreed, and women's health too. But where can we do that? I mean, yes, we support that, but isn't it about the entire information and communication on the topic already, like where it starts?
I think you have I'll just jump in for a minute if I may. I think we have to have so much data behind when we pitch behind us. And the more scientific the data is, the better, because you are coming up against people that do not have a lived experience with the issue. So, and so you have to overwhelm them with data and make sure that you have references to all that data to be able to get through it at the early stage. Now, at the later stage, and the early stage is where it's so important for us to be able to put that money behind them, because once they're growing and they're starting to make money, you can see scale, then all the VCs want to jump in. But at that early stage, when they don't have the experience, that's when they're going to pull back.
And like so in the end, it's like about, you need to convince double and triple then a startup that does something about diabetes care, to give that example from Charlotte, so that it just needs to be super convincing in the beginning. And I mean, yeah, that probably can also link to the question from you, Alexandrine, in regards to the corporates, and then of course we can jump right into Maren, in regards to the corporates and how we can address female health topics there. I mean, it also depends a bit. I mean, first of all, as you said, it's currently a bit of a trend, and we don't want to be. It's not a trend. It's something that is a given, and that it's there, and it's at least for 50% directly and for 100% indirectly of the population. So I think we see that also with our corporates, that of course they jump onto the train, let's say, but it needs to be sticky, and it needs to be something that is from like a 360-degree angle perspective, and not just like, okay, now it's a topic and we do something about it and then we can put it into our shelf next week. So we obviously can support that by introducing startups from that scene, and also we do a lot of events. We also are co-hosting the Found Her event, for instance, just to go into the topic of female founders. So we did that initiative in Munich as well last year with only female founders. And in regards to women's health, we also do kind of deal flows and topics only about that topic too. And we do see a lot, especially with Sanofi, for instance, consumer healthcare, with consumer focusing like over-the-counter products or something, just like applications to support menstrual pain. So there is a lot of demand there, but it's something that we can also influence, but it needs to be something long-term and not a trend. Long answer.
Exactly. And I think it is really in this space important to not only focus on the negative aspects regarding investing in women's health or raising capital. I mean, the women's health market is forecasted to grow by $48 billion within the next 7 years. So you are all actively helping take these businesses to the next level and being part of the growth within this market. So we've seen many successes over the past couple of years, such as Candy Therapeutics, Maven Clinic, LV, who raised significant capital. And we've also seen some flops, so Nayot, the breast pump Moxley. Matt, how do you help women's health startups succeed? And are there any key insights that you've learned over the years that you can share with anyone who's watching, who is a founder looking to raise money? That's to Matt. That's to Maren. I don't think Matt's microphone is working.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. Yeah, so I think some of the failures that you mentioned and some of the ones that I've seen have actually been due to lack of funding to some extent. I think some of these areas have been so hard to raise capital in, and healthcare is just not a space where you can do the move fast and break things. You often have to, take the time and do things the right way and get the right approvals, and it can be slow and it can be expensive. And so I think having the capital that you need is really important in healthcare. And one of the things that we did at January, we've done a couple actually founder surveys, and one of the surveys that we did found that women raise 37 cents for every dollar that a male founder raises at the early stage, so at pre-seed and seed. So these female founders are just going in undercapitalized from the beginning and have this big penalty. And Black female founders raise 2 cents for every dollar that a male founder raises. So I think, when you put it in those terms, the male founder has a team and all these resources, and the female founder is working out of a Starbucks and piecing it together. And I think that's hard in healthcare. So I think a lot of it is about the funding. And then I think our tagline at January is investing early and opening doors for the founders of the future. So a lot of our work is also just about trying to plug them in, open doors, introduce them to customers, and introduce them to investors so that they can more successfully raise their next round of funding.
And just do a follow-up question with you, Maren. So beyond investing in the companies, it seems that there's a significant need to actually help them and assist the companies along the way. So it's not just capital that would be beneficial. It's advice, it's introductions. Is that typical of VCs? Or is that something that you think is specific within this space?
I definitely think it's typical, yes. I think most VCs have a pretty built out platform. And I think the platforms, though, are focused on different things for different types of companies and different stages. And for us at January, our platform is very focused on helping plug these founders in, make the introductions, and help them get to the next round of funding. So we have an operator network, and we focus a lot on go-to-market and helping them with fundraising.
Great. And Dipali, as an angel investor, what do you do to actively make sure that the companies that you've invested in are successful?
I'm very regularly in touch with all my businesses. I'm just a WhatsApp away, is what I tell them. And, I've helped with fundraising. I've helped with strategy. I've helped with recruiting. Recently helped somebody, one of my companies is looking to go public, got a non-exec for her, So really done lots of different things for them. I've also very close to the female founders I've invested in. So I've discussed childcare and head lice. I'm always there for every question that they have because I'm a mother of 2 myself. So, try to support them beyond just work, just be there to talk to them when they need me.
Great. And Trish, have you had any experience with companies who have raised capital from other VCs and then didn't feel that they were getting the type of support that they required and came to you at a later stage?
We go into a number of later stage companies, especially when they're scaling because of the really powerful networks we have, because we have just within our investor network, we're in 44 states in the US and 16 countries. So we're able to use those networks to really assist companies as they're scaling. And then that also de-risks our portfolio as well. There are very particular issues that women's health companies face. If it's a consumer-facing product, one that those of us that are focused in the space understand is that, you're often kicked off social media. So you can say erectile dysfunction on Facebook, or other kinds of social media, and it's fine. But if you say or write vagina, you're often knocked out. And so we've actually worked with the general counsel at Facebook to make sure that our companies don't have their campaigns hijacked in the middle. That's just one example. Same with regulatory. I'll go back to erectile dysfunction. There are, over 50 products for men. And the one product that came out for women took, years almost a decade to get through clearance. So it's at every juncture that things, are a little harder, a little more difficult to process. And I'll just toss one other thing out. We also have a group of we bring all of our women's healthcare entrepreneurs together so that they can hammer out answers and solutions to a lot of these problems. I also back male CEOs in the women's space because if there's a certain, solution we're looking for, as long as they have a blended team, I'm interested. And the gender of the CEOs change over time. But one real interesting aha that came away from our last meeting was that I had a male CEO, looks like he comes from central casting, and his focus of his company is the fibromyalgia pain. And he said that, the big aha for him was that even as a male, he was really treated differently. And a number of people really questioned, looking at the pain of fibromyalgia, why didn't he do something else that was more accepted in the medical community? So men and women, both running women's health companies, have undue, issues getting funding and growing those companies.
Yeah. So wholesale changes at a national level might be the way forward in some respect, definitely from a healthcare perspective. So last January, Billy, a subscription service, so this is a direct-to-consumer subscription service for shaving and body care products, announced a 25 million Series A round led by Goldman Sachs. Many companies in healthcare are looking for acquisition exits and for larger companies to invest in them and larger banks to invest in them. So Frederick, how can Plug and Play help startups find the right partner that will embrace the brand's ethos?
So generally, we cannot recommend an investment like that, of course. We do connect and we do support whenever we are convinced of a startup and either that is in our network, our portfolio, and we are sparing partners for the business units of the corporates. But it's not only about investments, it's really about the co-creation, and that can lead to a commercial agreement, to white labeling, to implementing, integrating. It can be leading to anything. So it's for us really about supporting that. And it's also, as Trish said, it's about also the product and the team, and that is what should matter, that it's set up for success. And that's what we want to support, is like a mission-driven team that that has a great solution. And in the end, also for corporates, it's important that the things are easy to implement, like they are not the newest AI technology that maybe the business unit wouldn't even know how to integrate. And it needs to be something concrete that is like usable for the daily work of them. And often startups have great technologies, but are yet not applicable for a big corporate to work with. And that's something that we, for instance, always try to mention, that that the more sophisticated the technology is, like from the next century, that sometimes that doesn't help to have concrete business use cases, and that it's important to have something that is needed in your potential clients or the corporates' fields and in their businesses. So I think this is something that we always try to also mention.
Okay, great. And just before we go into the Q&A, Matt, I'm going to see whether you have anything to add to this, whether we're going to give you one last chance to see whether your mic or video is working. Matt, great.
Sorry, it's been one of those long days for my technology here. No, look, I think that it's sometimes really simple, and we need to know our roles. I think everybody on calls like this is in the same place. We're all aligned. We're all trying to affect the same systemic change. And my job is really simple, is to write checks and to be helpful. And I hope that if the groups that are represented here on this panel are all doing something, and that's inspiring other groups to get going. And it doesn't matter who was first. All that matters is that somebody got there and people came behind them, and that's how change happens, in my opinion. So, all I would say is that that's what I find with participating in discussion like this. You always find that people are aligned in trying to, make that same change. And let's all support the people that are trying to come up behind us. Like, we all on this call here have got to a certain position of privilege and position. One of the roles and responsibilities we've also got is to support other groups coming up behind. So I'm very aware of, having raised a venture capital fund, it's my job to petition up in the LP community, which got touched on here but doesn't get talked about enough. That's where real pressure comes from, because that's where all the money is. But also to petition down, so to use ADA as a platform to support other people to get their own funds going. And so, yeah, that's the only thing I would add, is it's multi-dimensional at this point in time. But we made great progress, but let's look up and let's look down as well.
Thank you so very much, Matt. I'm going to throw a question from the audience. Nicola Huffman asked us this. She would love to know and get an investor's perspective on the engagement problem that most low-tech fem health solutions have. For instance, guided self-management apps. With 30-day retention rates hovering 2 to 5%. How do they justify, so you guys, how do you justify investments in this area? Anybody? Maren? Trish?
So I don't know specifically what she's looking for there, but the greatest challenge, especially for a consumer focused product, is getting up above the noise and being able to hack growth. I mean, it is not easy. It's really, really difficult. And we won't go in until we see that they understand how to be able to grow their consumer base. It's critical. And there's a lot of healthcare now moving to consumer markets, especially because of COVID, but will continue there with remote monitoring and different kinds of apps, different apps that will actually enable people to do more self-managing of health. But their challenge is being able to get their customers in and get that engagement. And there are a lot of people that get into the space. There's only a few that will actually win and be able to find that engagement. And that's really the responsibility of the entrepreneurs, to be able to crack that code.
Thank you very much, Trish. And our last question, under 30 seconds, if you can, Maren. Can you give our audience a couple of tips when they pitch? So I know at January Ventures, you do things a little bit differently, but can you still give them some insights you've learned over the years?
Yeah, sure. So I think tips for pitching. I think at pre-seed and seed stage, I think the tips are, one, when you email the investor or send your information, make sure you have a really short, concise blurb about your company so that they can skim it, make sure it's bulleted, make sure it's really easy for them to understand. Make sure you have your one-liner when you meet them on what you do and why you exist in the world. And sometimes the description gets so long that it can be hard to understand. And so I think it's actually really hard to get one sentence on what you do and why you exist, but figure that out, because that's really critical. And then I think when you're actually pitching, I think it's just think of it as storytelling. And I think tell the story of why you're unique, why you're the person to build this business, and why this business should be built. And I think it's a lot about why you and why now and why your vision matters.
Thank you so very much, Maren. Thank you to all of you. This was an absolutely fantastic panel. Our next panel is on power to the consumer, so please tune in a few minutes. And last shout out to Avestia Ventures, women's health leader for this panel session. You can find more information on Avestia Ventures on our website at koyapartners.com. Thank you, everyone, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Of Women's Health, our annual event. We're Koya Partners. I'm an advisory group that's passionate about health tech and women's health innovation. We're a team of scientists, lawyers, and strategists with decades of experience solving business needs from concept to exit, covering intellectual property, GDPR, regulatory compliance, and commercialization. And we work with startups, biotech, pharma, and investors. We created the What Women Want event to share insights and have important conversations about women's health, and primarily to build an ecosystem that supports women's health innovation, discovery, partnership, and growth. Today's and tomorrow's conversation will really be focused on finding solutions to improve women's health. And at the end of the discussion, there will be a live Q&A. So to the audience, please use your chat box to share your questions with us. And before kicking off this panel entitled Power to the Consumer, we would like to introduce our women's health leader, Essity Ventures. Essity Ventures is a strategic initiative of Essity, a global health and hygiene company with a presence in more than 150 markets worldwide and leading intimate hygiene brands such as Libresse, Bodyform, Nana, and Tena. For years, Essity has been on a mission to break barriers to improve women's well-being, and has done that by creating innovative feminine care products as well as bold award-winning communication campaigns like Viva la Vulva and Womb Stories, and all to break taboos that hold women back. With Essity Ventures, the company takes one step forward in this direction by cooperating with top-notch femtech startups to lead the way towards a more digitally advanced and sustainable health and hygiene ecosystem. Essity Ventures is ready to explore different partnership models, committing to resources that go well beyond funding. To find out more, visit Essity Ventures website. And so now I'm going to hand over to you, Rachel. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. My name is Rachel Braun-Scherl. I'm a founder.
I think, Rachel, you might be muted.
Is that better? Yes? Okay. Welcome. My name is Rachel Braun-Scherl. I'm a founder, a business builder, a marketing strategist, and a vagipreneur, which is a person in the business of women's sexual and reproductive health. And I focus on solutions from menstruation through menopause. I am absolutely delighted to be moderating a panel today entitled What Women Want, Power to the Consumer, Focus on Women's Needs, with a group of femtech founders who are putting the power back into our hands, the power to make healthcare choices, the power to build businesses, and the power to create the change we want to see in the options for, experience of, and delivery of women's health. So let me introduce you to our talented, experienced, and dynamic panel of entrepreneurs, thinkers, and business leaders. And I have to say, I wish we had hours. The folks on the panel have so much experience and insight to offer, but we'll get through as much as we can in the time that we have together. Ali Kassir is the founder of Robin, which provides access to integrative maternal wellness tools, community, and resources to assist women and families on their unique paths to parenthood. Welcome. Vernita Brown is the Chief Operating Officer, as well as the first employee at Natalist, a science-based fertility company focused on women's journeys to and through pregnancy. Billy Quinlan, co-founder and CEO at Fertility, who's building the first evidence-based digital therapeutic for female sexual difficulties, aka the female Viagra. Colette Cordian, who's the CEO and founder of JoyLux, which is a consumer health tech company providing patented home use devices, delivering clinically proven results to the 54 million menopausal women in the US. And last but not least, Juan Pablo Segura, CEO and co-founder of Baby Scripts, which is a new model for prenatal and postpartum care that is transforming the way expectant mothers use technology to work with their healthcare providers. Thank you so much, welcome, and thank you for being here. So let's jump right in to the elephant in the room, which is otherwise called COVID. Clearly, managing businesses and life during this pandemic has created a number of obstacles and challenges in our business lives, our personal lives, our family lives. On the positive side, it has also created a much more dynamic narrative around women's health. where we seem to be talking about women's health in its totality. So you can't just talk about mental health without thinking about cardiac health. You can't talk about sexual health without talking about mental health. And so one of the things that has been great is that there's a much greater discussion and awareness of the differences of how things impact women, not just diseases that are unique to women, but also that impact women differentially. Today, we're lucky enough to have a number of businesses that are focused very specifically on reproductive health around pregnancy. So let's just jump right into that. I'll start with Allie. How has COVID changed the experience of people in the Robin community on their path to creating families? Talk a little bit about the process. What is easier for them? What's harder for you in terms of running this business and creating this community during COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rachel, and thanks for having me. You know, this pandemic has been a really challenging time for everyone, right? But for aspiring, expecting, and new parents, it certainly has unique challenges. If we think back to March and April, for aspiring parents, fertility cycles were canceled because fertility was deemed non-essential. For expecting parents, you had issues like partner bans, where partners weren't being allowed into labor and delivery to support their birthing partner and meet their newborn. For postpartum parents, I mean, postpartum can be isolating enough, let alone if you can't have family there or friends or, you know, a postpartum doula or a baby nurse there in person to help you. So our community was really in crisis mode. So we reacted very early and quickly. So within 5 days, we started a free virtual education program where we were doing classes over Zoom with our top parental wellness providers. So we did a childbirth education class for 3 hours. We did a feeding your baby class. We did a trying to conceive class. So we had something for each, you know, part of the community. And we saw thousands of signups because people really virtual education and virtual care was really the only option. And for many people right now, it still is. So it was interesting for us because it was a way that we could give back, but it was also a way that we could learn much more about product market fit as a company in this early stage of being a startup. So I would say the pandemic for us as a business, it hasn't necessarily been a hard pivot. It's been a way that we've accelerated our product roadmap to get virtual care, virtual education, virtual support out there to parents more quickly.
And I think one of the interesting pieces of this path to creating families is it's so unique as it is. And then you add this overhang of COVID and how so many parts of the experience are now different. Vernita, so within Natalist, how have you responded to the new dynamics of COVID, users' path of COVID and users' path to pregnancy? What are your members most concerned about?
Yeah.
How is the tech? Yeah.
I mean, I echo a lot really of what Allie shared. We sort of had two big questions that came out of that time for our users. And one was really from like the new mom who was saying, how do I manage all of this? Like, I'm home, my kid was in daycare, but now my kid's at home and I also have a partner, but like a lot of this invisible work kind of falls to me. So I feel very overwhelmed. And then there was this other group of these moms who were really on this trying to conceive path who were now doubting and saying like, do I even want to bring a kid into this world? Or like, I am pregnant. What does that mean for me in the months ahead? So we were very responsive, and I felt like it was a real opportunity for us as a company to really dig even deeper into one of our core values, which is around that community building and listening to our users. So we did some education as well, some web-based education. We were able to get Eve Rodsky, who's the author of Fair Play, to do a webinar with us for free for our users to just talk about like ways that you better manage and communicate with your partner about some of those things pertaining to the kids and pertaining to keeping the household up and all of those things, just to make life a little bit easier for that woman, because this was, I mean, it just felt like everything just sort of came down in this moment. And then for those who were just like wondering and scared even, we did another webinar with our docs who we have on staff, just around the most pertinent information that we had about COVID at that time. Of course, we've learned a lot more since then, but just giving folks those pieces of information as they have in real time, and what that meant for the mom who was 3 months pregnant, and what that meant for the mom who was 8 months pregnant even. And just in general, giving folks, especially those who were like delaying cycles, the IVF cycles, for example, giving them just like a little bit of encouragement and reassurance that, you know what, this too shall pass. and we will see the other side of this, and members of the medical community have studied these sort of things. So we are going to get through this. I think even more for us, as we just really begin to sort of settle into this reality this year, we've just been thinking more and more about what a post-pandemic mom needs and wants, and just what are women in this sort of reproductive age looking for now that they've had this tremendous life experience, right, that we all have gone through, and just continuing to be ever present to hear what she has to say.
And then you have to layer on that the rules are different in different geographies,
totally,
both in the US and around the world. And I would imagine that mental health is a much more frequent and potent conversation in the community as well.
For sure.
Juan Pablo, baby scripts is also part of the conversation for women as they are trying to get pregnant, or they are pregnant, and involves their healthcare providers. So how have the conversations you're having within your community changed, and how has the technology been able to respond to the new restrictions? Allie had mentioned some of them. You know, maybe it means you're in the delivery room by yourself. Maybe it means you're not going into the doctor for a regular checkup. So what are some of the things that you've seen and responded to in the context of baby scripts and COVID?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And it's an understatement to say that a lot has changed.
For sure.
And, you know, maybe I'll take a step back and kind of focus and then bring in COVID, in that when we started Baby Scripts 6 years ago, a lot of what we were doing, you know, we're a remote monitoring program for pregnant women that's very focused on solving the access to care crisis in the US. When you look at the dynamics in the United States, 50% of counties in the US don't have a practicing OBGYN. 55% of counties don't have a practicing midwife. Excuse me. So when we started the company, it was very focused on just using tech to bridge the gaps and allow patients to connect with their providers. COVID has only worsened the access to care crisis in the US. You're seeing the professional association saying, hey, before COVID, it was okay to see patients 14 times. Now you can only see them 6 times because we need to promote social distancing and prevent the spread of the disease. Well, okay, we're preventing the spread of the disease, but now all of a sudden we've cut in half the number of potential interventions that women can receive when they're with their doctor. So the game has changed in our world, because our customers, large health systems, we work with more than 65 health systems in the country and remote monitor 220,000 pregnancies a year right now. And you just look at the dynamic, the health systems are saying, we need something from the home. We need to know that our moms are okay. And they're now further relying on technology, virtual healthcare, remote monitoring programs like ours. And kind of the last piece that I'll bring up, and I think one of the most interesting dynamics in our space, is that one of the biggest obstacles for adopting digital health in the US has always been kind of this barrier to changing practice patterns and behaviors. You always had stalwart physicians that said, I will never change. I've been doing this for 30 years. And there's no reason for me to change. I'm doing just fine. What COVID did is it literally forced everyone to have to change. And now there is no excuse for people to not do more digital health, because there's no excuse for them to say that it didn't work. It did work. We managed the COVID pandemic through telemedicine. So, in a lot of ways, I mean, it's a blossoming of everything digital in healthcare, and particularly in pregnancy.
Yeah, and they say, necessity is the mother of invention. If you weren't facile with digital technology and telemedicine, now you have to be, because there are restrictions that don't allow patients to come in or for you to interact in a certain way. So even if you didn't want to adjust, COVID forced everybody to adjust in the care model.
Yeah, and I would say the emblematic use case is a physician that's 2 years from retiring, 63 years old, and having to use telemedicine. I mean, that's a game changer. And if people don't realize that, then they're gonna miss out on a massive trend and change in healthcare, just behaviors and leverage in certain tools and feature sets.
Yeah, and we can't discount the learning curve on both sides. So we're having a lot of conversations now which look at women much more holistically. And as I mentioned earlier, you can't look at one part of a woman's life and separate that. I'm concerned about her sexual health, but I'm not going to think about her physiological or her mental health. I can't think about her cardiac health without thinking about her bone health. And this perspective is so important and informs so many of the interactions companies are having with their customers. So the folks who spoke already were talking about they're pregnant, they're dealing with other life issues, they're dealing with other stress. You are needing to deal with your customers and interact with them in the totality of their current experience. So Colette, with that in mind, menopause is one of the categories that until very recently, we had very few conversations about online with physicians, but now in some ways, given the numbers that you pointed out, it seems to be the holy grail. It's not necessarily well understood, it's complicated, and it's surprising for people, the range of symptoms and the other things they experience. So how has JoyLux tried to expand the conversation around menopause to focus on bigger benefits? So moving from, how many pads do you wear if you have stress incontinence, to higher order benefits that improve women's lives?
That's a great question. Thank you, Rachel. Delighted to be here. Just a quick, JoyLux, we have a proprietary device that helps women, menopausal women, when they're dealing with issues like stress incontinence, vaginal dryness, and sexual dysfunction. So, the first thing is, how do we get the conversation going? We have to start by destigmatizing menopause and these issues. We have to normalize it. Talking about women's body parts, like the vagina, it is just that. It is a vagina. We don't, use words like, oh, my hoo-ha, or my V, or my, all these little tricky words that are, slang words. We talk about it as the anatomy, it is a vagina. But we really want women to know that they're not alone, that these are really prevalent problems that impact so many women. And by simply just saying, hey, it's okay to talk about it, we're helping women then find solutions, whether it's our solution or another solution. We're just trying to get the conversation going. But the biggest thing that, even to get women talking about it today, we have to start with looking at the platforms and where are women going. And what was interesting when I started this is women, our customer, the menopausal woman, the 55-year-old woman, she's on Facebook. And Facebook has these crazy rules that you can't talk about things like menopause or the vagina because it's deemed to be inappropriate or pornographic. Or so we've spent a good first 2 years of our existence trying to work with these giant companies, the Facebooks, the Googles, to say, hey, it's okay to have these conversations. It's okay to talk about this. And, we're making good progress. I think because of the early work that we've done, more and more companies are
seeing less resistance on Facebook to engage in these conversations. But what we're seeing now is that more and more women are talking about it. And whether it's in private Facebook groups or whether it's on platforms like the Joylux, where we're engaging with our customers, we are definitely seeing more and more women talk about these, the issues they're experiencing. And as a result, I think more and more women are getting help, the help that they need to live a better quality of life. So, I'm very encouraged.
And just for people who are relatively new to this concept, for literally over a decade, companies that are in the space, and still continues today, vaginal health, sexual health, some aspects of reproductive health, literally you get a notice from Facebook that says this ad or this image violates our policies about what's appropriate.
Yeah,
Yet we all see many, many other categories that seem to fly through because the algorithms are designed differently and then applied differently. I see Billy nodding her head. We're so aware of the challenges of building businesses in this space, whether it's access to capital or, as Colette mentioned, access to channels, communication outlets. And in my experience, women's satisfaction is one of the most challenging because, if we can get you comfortable talking about vaginas, sexual pleasure apparently still appears to scare people. So many times over the last several years, we've heard announcements of a female Viagra, most of which have not lived up to the hype, obviously, because female sexual response is so much more complex. But how have you risen to the occasion as the digital Viagra for women and catalyzing these conversations that in certain channels are very difficult to begin?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Colette. I was like nodding my head furiously.
I saw
These platforms are really challenging to work with, but to Colette's point, there's companies that have come before us and put such amazing groundwork in that I think the tide is changing, and that is really great. And I'll come on to that, but we use the term female Viagra very tongue-in-cheek. It's much more to kind of raise awareness that we have, as a society, a really great understanding of male sexual difficulties and sexual problems, specifically erectile dysfunction. And there's a huge market that has been, over the last 2 decades, built around Viagra and pharmaceutical solutions to these male problems. But when it comes to female sexual difficulties, it's such an unknown area, an under-researched, underfunded area. And you're right, the solutions that have come to market have been quite controversial, quite often terrible side effects or very ineffective. And the solutions that do work to help women with their sexual difficulties are therapy, and specifically mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. But this is not scalable. We don't have enough practitioners to meet the need and the growing need of this area. So what we're doing at Fertility is digitizing this and creating something where women can empower themselves to look after their sexual health and their sexuality. And so I don't know whether yet we've lived up to the hype, but we are helping hundreds of thousands of women, and the feedback has been amazing. And it's just because we're raising awareness of this topic. We're finally shining a light on sexual difficulties and showing that women are not less sexual than men. They're actually equally or more so. They just haven't been given permission to really explore that, and they haven't been given the tools to overcome their really common sexual difficulties. There's a great study in the UK called NATSL, which studies sexual behaviors and attitudes, and it found that 51% of women report a sexual difficulty. But I bet if we asked the audience today what those sexual difficulties were, hardly anyone would really be able to tell us what the answer is to that. But it's things like low libido, inability to orgasm, anxiety around sex, pain and trauma. And trauma specifically, 1 in 5 women globally will be a survivor of sexual trauma. And that has a really profound impact on their ability to enjoy sex and have really healthy relationships. And so that's what we're just trying to do with Fertility. It's not really that we are Viagra, and we're not really trying to be Viagra. It's just to get the conversation started. And especially in the VC landscape, it's trying to help a lot of male investors understand and have empathy for this problem, because that's a challenge as well. And that kind of feeds into unlocking the funding so that we can help women in this space.
When I've fundraised in this space and you say the U.S. Statistics, 43% of women have sexual concerns and difficulties. If you're in a room with all men, you often hear, well, I never heard anybody talk about that. And to your point, it doesn't mean people. Yeah, it's not, there's really not, we haven't historically had a language or an environment to have those conversations, which you're making much more accessible. And I think the other piece about this idea of Viagra, the reason that it works so well as an analogy is Viagra, you take a pill, it pumps up the hydraulic system and everybody's ready to go. But what is clear in the conversation is that female sexual response is much more complicated, and it does involve the mind, and it involves the body, and it involves the situation, and it involves behavior, and it involves relationships. So clearly we're way too complex for one pill to be able to resolve all that. So you're taking a broader approach.
Exactly. But I think the key is it's not unsolvable. And there are effective solutions. And I think sometimes this is a narrative that we have as well, is that women are just too complex and too difficult to bother with. But actually men also not all men are suitable for Viagra either. And complexities are for men as well. And, Fertility will eventually be able to support all genders. But I think it's just opening up a much wider conversation about the importance of our sexuality and our sexual well-being and our overall quality of life, because this has been really neglected.
Thank you so much. One of the things that strikes me, and having had conversations with some of you or having had the pleasure of working with others, is how important listening is. Listening to your customers, the fact that many of you are actually customers of the services that your company would offer, and maybe you were even the original catalyst for creating the company. And so this idea of listening as a very active exercise has been critical to the growth of your communities. So Vineet, I want to ask you, how has listening changed what you've offered? Can you give an example of information that you heard that gave rise to a new approach or a new product offering based on the fact that your community was telling you what they need?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question in light of what we were just discussing around how a woman's emotions and just what she's thinking about sort of plays into this whole reproductive health picture, because really Natalists would not exist if other CPG companies did a better job listening. Our founder, Hallie, she's been very open about her fertility struggles and just her journey to parenthood. But there were some products that she engaged with that were just triggering emotionally. And so to be engaging with those products, while you're supposed to be getting ready to have sex with your partner with the end goal of conceiving a child, it was just really difficult. And so she wanted to create a space where there would be this sensitivity to the end user. So that's really our whole mindset. So we take customer reviews very seriously. We take emails and DMs and every touch point that we have with the customer very seriously. We discuss them in our all hands meetings on Monday and think about, how we might implement feedback where possible. I think those are the things that we're just doing on a day-to-day level. And then just big picture, of course, we've interviewed women, we've had user panels, we've done surveys, of thousands of women. Early on, we did a survey of 1,000 women that has actually led to the development of our new ovulation test kit. So I'm really excited about that product. We finally were able to get a retail partner to pick it up and are going to be launching that in the spring. So for us, it's all about listening. We are our users, we're all 30-something-year-old women. And sometimes even in product meetings, we might all text 5 friends who live in 5 different regions of our country just to make sure, as a gut check, that final gut check, we're going in the right direction. So it's something that we believe in deeply as a company because, recently I read a stat that said something I think it was 66% of women feel misunderstood by healthcare marketers in the healthcare industry, and that just shouldn't be. Like, we're willing to talk. We're here, we're willing to engage and talk, and so that's what we've seen from our community, and we want to hear them out.
Terrific, thank you. Billy, as part of your user experience, you've talked about this assessment tool that you're launching, which is related to what you heard from your customers. Can you describe that and how it will work and how it might inform how a consumer user interacts with Fertility?
Yeah, absolutely. We've always taken from day one a very community-led approach to building the product. We started the product, myself and Anna, my co-founder, not as experts, but as two very frustrated women that have overcome sexual assault and violence, and we're looking to kind of regain our sexual power and regain our sexual well-being. And we drew in experts. So we sort of had two stakeholders. We had the incredible practitioners and experts in our space. And then our second and most important stakeholder are the community and the women that we're building the product for. And so we've made a real effort to involve them in every step of the way. And that looks like monthly user testing sessions. We have a dedicated Slack channel where we open up for feedback, keeping them very involved in the product development. And one thing that we really discovered was that actually when it comes to sexual difficulties or sexual problems, we don't have the language around it. So we don't necessarily, as women, even identify that we have a sexual difficulty or sexual problem. And that a lot of that comes from the fact of the sort of the cultural context that we exist in that women are just less sexual, or women don't have high drive, or women don't enjoy sex. Like, we get these narratives fed to us all the time. So it's really hard to understand that actually what we're experiencing, whilst it is very normal and very common, is a problem that has a solution, and we can overcome that. And so for us, we needed to find a way of helping women understand that the experience that they're living through is a sexual difficulty or sexual problem, and that they can get a solution for it, and helping them break down that understanding. And so the assessment tool is a way for us to do that. It's built against sort of three core pillars. We have confidence, health, and pleasure. And we just take a kind of gut check, or a pulse, if you like, of our customer, speaking to them in a language and asking them questions in a way that they can understand, and makes this topic a bit more accessible, and then gives them sort of a score at the end of it, which says, this is where you are in your journey, and this is what your personalized route forward could look like if you wanted to continue with Fertility. So it's just helping them give a language to their problems so that they feel seen and heard, and that they recognize their experience is completely normal. Because I think giving people a language is the first step, and then they can go out and find the necessary solutions or the route forward. So that's how we've really done that. And I think that's what makes female founders really special, because we, as a gender, this is a big stereotype, but we are very empathetic, and we've had to be. And so one of our incredible strengths is listening. It's our ability to actively listen. And that allows us to let go of our ego and not build what we want to build, and not build what we think our consumers want, but actually deeply listen, be willing to be wrong, and be willing to kind of pivot and evolve and constantly adapt, which is, a very special and a very, very, very important skill to have when you're building an early stage business.
Absolutely. And now you have tons and tons of data to support those conversations. So we are talking about, these big situations, whether it's pregnancy or infertility or pleasure or interacting with your doctor, and the experiences are so deeply personal for women, yet you're all focusing on building scalable businesses. So how do we talk about the products and services you offer in a way that feels personal? So can you do mass customization in a way, with the data that you have and with the knowledge you have about your users? So Ali, I'm curious if you found the balance between building something you can scale while still simultaneously providing that personal experience that, as many of you said, she feels heard, or the family feels heard, or she doesn't feel alone. How can you manage that need for scalability and actual customization, given the experiences that you're helping people with are so personal?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, in our space, we've said this before, but every path to parenthood is different. Every path to parenthood is unique. And I think what we've seen not work in this space is that one size fits all approach. So we have to move towards customization because that's also what the consumer wants, right? I mean, we live in a world where we can customize, you know, our salad ingredients and, you know, how the apps are displayed on our iPhone. And, you know, we should feel like we have that same customization and advocacy in, you know, health and wellness as well. So, I mean, what we've done particularly at Robin is by creating this open, transparent marketplace where you can find and book a lactation consultant that specializes in twins and multiples, or if you need a doula who specializes in LGBTQ families, or you know, whatever your issue may be, that's really been the goal of opening up the marketplace on both the provider side and the customer side, because we are going to, you know, really own this aggregated data set of, you know, fertility, pregnancy, postpartum, and we need to use that to really better the experience for the consumer. So it was really, I would say, the rationale behind our entire business model, you know, and not saying that we as Robin know what you need and we're going to match you, you know, with exactly the provider that you need. We're really empowering the consumer to find exactly what they're looking for and what issue they might be going for in the particular, you know, stage of pregnancy. And then, you know, I would just echo some of what Juan Pablo talked about in the beginning. You know, in the US, you have 7 million women who don't have access to adequate maternity care. So if you're going to reach those women, you have to reach them in different ways. Not everybody is going to be able to book a virtual consultation or an in-person consultation. Some people might be looking for that, you know, on-demand class or educational article or downloadable PDF. So I think when we think about our different content streams, it's, you know, how do we customize enough options so that we can reach, you know, the people who don't have access and who are looking for this type of, you know, virtual care and virtual education.
Thank you. So Juan Pablo, it's a good handoff to you. So you're dealing with physicians and patients and a community that are all over the country and might have different needs in terms of how you communicate. Do you have an example of a different approach you might take with, you know, an HCP, a healthcare practitioner in, you know, rural fill in the blank versus the communities where they're much more urban and there's many more healthcare choices? How do you go about that process of customizing depending on some of the issues that Ali raised, whether it's access, whether it's geography, you know, education, and all the other things that would make each interaction have different challenges?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I'll say is that there's definitely not like a monolithic set of problems that every provider has. I mean, yes, overall, there's a high level of hypertension, there's a high level of diabetes across the country, but you know, it is localized in specific areas. For example, in the South, in the US, you see a lot more kind of comorbidities than you see in New England, right, in the Northeast. And so the way we've adapted to that reality is, you know, we started the company with one product, one very specific use case that was focused on solving one specific issue, which was very much access to routine prenatal care. One of the things that we've had to do, both because it's a great business decision, but also because it helps us better serve our patients and our customers, which are providers, is we had to build 6 additional products. Because when we go in and sell baby scripts to a health system, some health systems don't have problems with access. They have enough providers, but guess what? They see a lot of Medicaid patients and they want to help them kind of identify and treat the social determinants that they're faced with, right? So we need to have an experience very focused on SDOH. Some providers are having a lot of trouble managing their hypertensives. And so, we had to build a hypertension product. And so a lot of what we've done and how we've grown the business and the product has been very focused around risk-specific tech or digital experiences. So, when you get onboarded by your provider onto baby scripts, you might have a very different instance. The patient might have a very different experience on baby scripts than your counterpart at the health system down the street, or your counterpart in a rural county 50 miles or 100 miles away, right? And I think that's just a necessity for how you deliver technology in this space. And you also, it just reflects the really challenging dynamics. And I'm mostly talking about health systems, or at least referring to health systems, but there's other layers of healthcare delivery in this country. There are things called FQHCs, federally qualified health centers, that are more focused on kind of low income patients and environments. And so definitely there's no one size fits all, both product and even sales strategy. And you've got to be very attentive to these realities in your market.
It's just fascinating how you respond. There are geographical differences, there are communal differences, there are socioeconomic differences, and finding a way for all those people to enter the experience with a tool that will work for them is just really fascinating. So thank you for that. Colette, I was hoping that you could talk about Joylux in the sense that you talk about a range of benefits that the product provides, whether it's vaginal tightening, reduction of incontinence symptoms, increased enjoyment. Do you have different conversations with customers depending on what benefit they're looking for? And then I would add, do you have different kinds of conversations with customers in the US versus in other geographies where the product is available?
Yeah, great question. So when we started Joylux, we were using a new technology to basically rebuild collagen and elastin in the tissue, vaginal canal, for a tightening effect, knowing that that would improve bladder function. We launched with the goal of improving stress urinary incontinence. What happened though is women started reporting back that vaginal dryness was improving, or sexual dysfunction or pain with intercourse was improving. So we started to research that, doing clinical studies along those lines to really assess how that was benefiting women. And that's when we discovered that our technology, unbeknownst to us in the beginning, was having all of these other positive effects. So a woman may come to us with incontinence. Great, we're going to help her with that. But she's also going to get the benefit of increased blood flow, which would have a positive effect on dryness. But how we talk to our customers does differ. So we may do targeted stories, ads, blog posts, whatever, specific to a specific issue, or talk to a customer specifically about that particular indication or issue that they have. So we do a lot of segmentation. But what I'm most excited about is now that this technology, now that it's well understood and we've been using it now for the past 4 or 5 years, is that now we're able to evolve it beyond just what those symptoms are, and using data to start doing correlation. So a woman is telling us, we're solving maybe stress incontinence, but she's telling us she has hot flashes, or she's telling us she's having night sweats. And so by using an app and collecting this data, we can start doing correlation and really just better understand menopause in general. And ultimately, our goal is to get really predictive and help women as they go through their journey. So they may come to us initially with incontinence as their problem, but what we may be able to tell them is women like you may, at this point in their life journey, will experience this. You're not there yet, but you may get there in 3 or 4 or 5 years. And so these are the kind of things that you can do to either be preventative about hopefully negating these issues, or when they come, these are the solutions that will help you alleviate them. So this is all real new. We're really excited about the, how our technology has evolved and how we can use data to just better understand our customer and help them through this life journey.
One of the things that's so exciting listening to all of you is between the group of the folks on the phone, you are collecting so much data about women and users that we never had before, that we can use for making predictions, that we could use obviously in the context of AI to provide better treatment, to anticipate the needs that people might have. And for those folks who are listening who haven't been involved in sexual health or women's health for that long, this is like the most exciting. This is like winning the lottery for me, particularly being able to talk to all of you and how much you are pushing these categories and these treatment areas forward. Before we turn it over to the audience, I wanted to give each of the panelists a chance to respond. And again, I wish we had way longer to do this, but what is the one thing you now know that you wish you knew when you launched your business? So for people who are thinking about starting a business or have an idea and don't know where to start or in the throes of it and struggling, what is the best piece of advice that you would share? Vernita, I'll start with you.
That's a really fun question. I feel like I want to say so many things, but at the same time, for those who would be thinking about starting a business, part of the fun of it is what you find out along the way. No day is the same. And every day we sort of rise to a new challenge, which is really fun. I think those with that sort of entrepreneurial spirit will enjoy that part. But I think practically for us, we launched a Mother Earth initiative back this summer, and it includes for us a commitment to becoming plastic neutral as the first step. So that means that for every pound of plastic we sell, we facilitate the removal of that much plastic pollution. And that's really just a start in being a more sustainable company. But if I think about like something that I wish I knew, I wish that I'd known earlier that we were going to go in that direction. I wish that we committed to it sooner and just sort of, because I know there is a series of choices that we made earlier on that we might have made differently if we'd had this as one of our true North Stars then. And I'm just so glad that really millennial consumers more and more are willing to even pay a little bit more for a more sustainable product. I think there's a moral imperative around companies becoming more sustainable, and
Absolutely.
I'm glad we're doing it now. I wish that even earlier on we would have been doing it.
Thank you,
walking that
Billy.
line.
How about you?
I think that as Manette said, there's many things. I feel like you make so many mistakes along the way, but I was just reflecting on that question, and ideas are cheap and execution is everything. And in order to execute, you need to have the right people around you. And so there's sort of two things that I would say on that. One, when my co-founder and I started the business, we were really a bit fearful of reaching out to experts in the space until we had the whole business plan thought through and the idea thought through, and could really bring a lot of data to support our idea. And actually, the sort of academics or scientists or researchers working in this space are so encouraged when entrepreneurs want to start building businesses, that they love giving away their time, and their time is so valuable and can help you shortcut so many things. So I'd say, don't be fearful of reaching out to any of those. And then the second, so that's sort of like the expert community, and then getting your team right is so critical. And so really being clear around what skills that you need and not letting your ego get in the way of that, and knowing that you're probably going to be the worst person in the room, and that's fine. And actually idea. Get brilliant people surrounding you. So I think those are two.
Thank you so much. Allie, how about you?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I have so many thoughts, but I think in the beginning, when you decide to start a company, you kind of immediately can sometimes go to like the future vision of what it's going to look like, or your future self as a founder and CEO and what that's going to be like. But really, almost every day, I mean, even 4 years into it, feels like I'm starting at the beginning, right? It's like T equals 0. So just being really rooted in like the present moment during this journey, and you know, to echo what Vernita said, like the fun of it is in not knowing what's going to happen next. And if you can get really comfortable with that uncertainty, it's really hard, because most of us as on this panel, I think as like type A personalities, uncertainty can give us, you know, some anxiety and just cause some challenges for us. But I think that's something I've really learned, is just to, you know, you don't have to know every single step along the way. It's always going to kind of feel like you're at the beginning, and not to like live for that future event and live for that kind of future self and future company necessarily.
Thank you so much. Juan Pablo?
Yeah, I wish someone told me that healthcare is hard. Yeah, you know, it's this is my first venture, so you know, you only know as much as you can reference, and you know, all the referenceable data points are like Facebook and Twitter, and you're like, oh, it's gotta be easy to grow a company in tech, right?
Absolutely.
I think you have to be very sober. I always tell people that are interested in going into just technology, entrepreneurship, and especially in healthcare, you got to give yourself 5 years to just know whether or not it's going to work. And like, that seems really aggressive, but like, and really long, but you know, in a space where it takes you 3 meetings to just schedule an intro meeting, 3 months to schedule an intro meeting, you know, it just takes time. It takes time to get feedback. It takes time to go live. And so that kind of giving yourself a window to truly either succeed or fail and to learn, I think is something that like I didn't conceptualize when I started. And yeah, to the point, another point is you're definitely not the smartest person in the room. So just listen and learn. I think the best entrepreneurs are able to get the right people around them and are able to get access to the right people. And it really is about just your personality and whether or not, you know, people can believe in you. So be a believable person and good things will happen to you, I think.
And the ecosystem in women's health and maternal health and reproductive health, in my experience, is the most collaborative community that I've ever been a part of. So people do want to help. Paulette, I want to give you a chance to do that, and then we're going to turn it quickly over to the audience for questions.
Yeah, just really quick, I'll kind of echo what Juan Pablo said. I didn't realize women's health would be this challenging to market in an environment where we've heard about erectile dysfunction for decades, and you know, talking about penises and condoms, but God forbid we talk about women's health and vaginas. Holy cow, you know, just overcoming those hurdles. And then when a potential investor, a VC, says, well, how come you didn't go from $1 million to $100 million overnight? I'm like, well, you know, Facebook shut us down 5 times,
right?
You know, 6 months. So give us a break. Yeah, but
we'll get there.
We're getting there.
Awesome. So I think we have time for a couple of questions from the audience.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone, for this amazing panel. We have a few questions for the audience. I'll start with a funny one. So the conference is entitled What Women Want. And the question from Naomi is, do women know what they want? Or is it what Steve Jobs said? If I had asked people what they wanted, we would have never gotten the iPhone, the iPad, or the iWatch. So whoever wants to respond to that question, go ahead. Thanks.
Women want to be heard.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess that a man asked that question, but women don't know every.
All right, that's I'm trying to stay out of the the only guy.
I think that it's fair to say women know a lot about what they want, and based on the experiences that you all have and the conversations that we've had being in the space, they will tell you, as we said, if you listen. Do they know everything? No. Do they know what they don't know about sexual pleasure or about fertility? No. But what they do know is how to communicate what they're experiencing and what they're feeling, and they know how to ask questions. So going back to some of the earlier comments, it is absolutely not one size fits all, and it's all about, being heard.
I will, if I could just jump in here for a second, I will say, and again, this is a man running a women's focused digital health company. So I have to recognize, right, where I can start and end. But, in my experience raising capital in this space, there is 100% a massive bias against women's health. It is, I just recently got off the phone like 2 weeks ago with an investor because we're raising a much larger round now. And he point blank told me, I don't think there's any money in women's health. And I was insulted by that. And I think, not just because I have a company in the space, but I think it is disgusting to even think about a position where 50% of the population is not worth considering. And so, again, do I have maybe some certain privileges in being a man running a company? Probably, if not completely. But there is a wholehearted obstacle and barrier that trying to do anything in this space exists. And it's being overcome, but there's still a lot of problems in that.
Yeah.
And
thank you so much. And we're happy to have you in this community, and we appreciate your honesty. Another question.
Juan Pablo, that's actually a great segue to the next question, which was directed at you by Tristan. And he said, as a male founder of a women's health company, so obviously you just mentioned that you have had a positive experience by being a man in investors' rooms, but do you feel that that's hindered you in any way?
So you're always going to get someone that makes an offhand comment about why I decided to start a company in women's health. But listen, I'm a brother to my sister who has 2 kids. I'm a son to my mother who had 6 children. And every man is both, it's the honor of my life to be able to save women's lives. And so I'm very point blank about, I'm a stakeholder. Yes, I will never know what it means to be pregnant, and I'm very humble about that. But I'm here to help and give my life to the women around me. And so again, I'm very proud of what I do, and sometimes it is a little awkward. I always have to start with a joke, like why did a bachelor start a pregnancy company? But it's been the most amazing experience of my life doing what I do.
I think if I can just jump in on that as well, I think there's this perception that only women can work in women's health. Only female investors can invest in women's health. Only women can be the entrepreneurs of women's health. And only women can be the receivers of the benefits of women's health. And we are like one giant ecosystem where women's health impacts everyone's health. And it's important that men engage in this topic just as much as it is that women engage in this topic. So I think it's fantastic that there's men building products in this space, because it means they're engaged in it, and also they can see the enormous opportunity in it as well. So yeah, I don't think women's health is something just for women.
Before I turn it over to the group at Koya to close, I really want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank all of you for the amazing work that you do. Well, certainly for spending time with us on this panel, but for the changes you're trying to make, for the solutions you're developing, and for your commitment and passion to women's health, which we all know is an enormous business opportunity. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you to all of our panelists. That was an absolutely amazing panel. So thank you again from the bottom of our hearts. Just a last reminder that our women's health leader for this panel session was SCT Ventures. You can find more information on sctventuresiLab.com or on Koya Partners website. Thank you, everyone, and join us tomorrow for our last panel session, the year in review, with amazing OBGYNs from around the world who are also founders. So join in. Thank you again. See you next time.
Thank you.